Hi guys, tonight we're stepping onto the southern Great Plains during a winter night when the temperature has fallen far below comfort. The prairie looks empty beneath a hard sky, yet you quickly discover that emptiness can be deceptive. A Comanche warrior travelling here cannot simply stop, wrap himself in a robe, and hope for sunrise. Wind steals warmth. Damp clothing becomes dangerous. A poorly chosen campsite can turn an ordinary winter night into a miserable test of endurance. Yet generations of experience have taught people how to read this landscape almost like a familiar room. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are getting comfortable, comment where you're listening from and your local time. Now, dim the lights and imagine the last pale sunlight disappearing behind an enormous western horizon. You're riding beneath a sky that seems larger than anything surrounding you. The land stretches outward in muted browns, silver grasses, and patches of old snow. Your horse moves steadily beneath you, breathing clouds of white vapor into the evening air. Each breath disappears almost immediately. The southern plains are often imagined as a landscape of relentless summer heat. Yet winters here can become surprisingly severe, especially when northern air sweeps southward without much resistance. There are few mountains or dense forests capable of stopping those cold air masses. A powerful winter front can therefore race across open country and transform mild conditions remarkably quickly. You feel that openness now. The wind presses against your clothing and finds every imperfect opening around your neck and wrists. Dry grass whispers continuously, producing a soft scratching sound that follows you across the darkening prairie. You smell your horse, worn leather, cold earth, and the faint smoky scent clinging to your clothing. These ordinary smells become strangely comforting because everything beyond them feels enormous and exposed. For Comanche travelers, winter survival depends partly upon accepting one simple reality. You do not defeat the weather through toughness alone. You work around it. The Comanche became renowned for extraordinary mobility across the southern plains, particularly after horses transformed their society during the 18th century. Mounted travel allowed hunting, trading, raiding, visiting, and migration across distances that would otherwise demand exhausting journeys on foot. But the horse did not make winter disappear. If anything, mounted travel created another living creature whose warmth, food, water, and safety required constant attention. Your survival and your horse's condition are closely connected, especially when traveling far from a larger camp. As daylight weakens, you begin paying closer attention to the shape of the ground. A shallow depression suddenly matters more than a beautiful view. A line of trees becomes important. A creek bank, low ridge, cluster of brush, or sheltered bend might reduce the wind enough to make sleeping considerably easier. Even modest protection can change how quickly your body loses heat. This is one of those historical realities that rarely looks dramatic in paintings. Survival often depends upon choosing the slightly better patch of ground. There is no heroic music. There is only wind. Comanche people possess generations of accumulated knowledge about the plains. Although surviving written descriptions are uneven and often filtered through outsiders, much of what historians reconstruct comes from archaeology, environmental history, oral traditions, neighbouring peoples, traders, soldiers, captives, and later ethnographic accounts. That makes some details uncertain. Scholars continue debating how consistently particular winter camping practices were followed across different Comanche bands, periods, and circumstances. A large family camp behaved differently from several warriors travelling quickly across unfamiliar territory. You should therefore imagine flexibility rather than one rigid survival manual. Tonight, you're travelling with a small party. You have no comfortable village waiting immediately ahead, and darkness is arriving faster than you would prefer. The temperature continues falling. You notice frost beginning to gather along exposed grasses where moisture has settled. Your fingers feel increasingly stiff whenever they leave the protection of your clothing. Cold affects judgment gradually. That is perhaps its most unpleasant trick. You may initially feel merely uncomfortable, then increasingly tired, clumsy, and strangely uninterested in solving problems. Experienced travelers cannot wait for that stage. The decision about where to sleep must begin while enough daylight remains to inspect the terrain. You scan the horizon while your horse carries you forward at an economical pace. You are searching for protection rather than perfection. A wooded creek bottom could provide both fuel and shelter. But low places may also collect colder air. Thick vegetation might slow the wind, while exposed hilltops generally offer exactly the opposite. Every choice contains a compromise. There is also the question of visibility. Comanche warriors travelling through contested territory might prefer a camp that does not advertise itself across miles of open prairie. A large, cheerful fire sounds wonderful when your toes are cold. Unfortunately, it can also announce your location to anyone watching from far away. That creates an uncomfortable calculation. Warmth must sometimes compete with concealment. One quirky detail appearing in accounts of plains travel involves how much attention experienced people gave seemingly insignificant natural clues. The movement of grass, drifting snow, animal behavior, and even the feel of air near a slope could reveal where wind would become strongest. To an inexperienced traveller, grass is simply grass. To someone living within this environment, its movement can become a weather report. You begin noticing those movements yourself. Tall stems lean together toward the southeast, shivering beneath repeated gusts. Loose snow snakes close to the ground rather than rising high into the air. The wind has a dry bite. Your cheeks feel tight where exposed skin meets the cold. The sensation is uncomfortable but useful because it reminds you that the night will demand preparation. Ahead, the landscape finally changes. A shallow watercourse cuts through the prairie, bordered by scattered cottonwoods and tangled brush. The trees are bare, their branches clicking quietly whenever stronger gusts pass overhead. You slow your horse. The air smells slightly different near the drainage, carrying damp soil and decaying leaves beneath the sharper scent of winter grass, somewhere among the trees. A bird gives one brief call before becoming silent. You listen carefully. Nothing unusual answers. Your companions spread slightly apart as they examine the ground. Nobody needs a lengthy discussion because everyone understands what must be considered before darkness becomes complete. There must be enough shelter from the wind. There should be material for a controlled fire if circumstances allow one. The horses need suitable ground nearby. Water would be valuable, although frozen water presents its own tedious little problems. Most importantly, the place must allow tired bodies to preserve warmth rather than spend the entire night fighting exposure. You dismount and immediately notice how different the cold feels while standing still. Riding has kept your muscles active, but now the wind seems more personal. Your boots meet firm earth. The horse shifts beside you, leather tack creaking softly. You place a hand briefly against its warm neck and feel the extraordinary contrast between living heat and frozen air. For a moment, warmth seems abundant. Then you remove your hand. This is why buffalo robes, hides, sheltered camps, food, fire, and intelligent positioning matter so much. Human bodies continuously produce heat. Yet winter survival depends upon slowing how quickly that heat escapes. Comanche winter endurance was therefore not some mysterious ability to ignore cold. Their bodies followed exactly the same biological rules as everyone else's. Their advantage was knowledge. That knowledge included clothing, shelter, fuel, food, movement, horses, weather, and landscape. It also included knowing when pride was useless. The plains punish unnecessary stubbornness. You walk several steps toward the creek bank and crouch behind a natural rise. Almost immediately, the wind weakens against your face. The difference is remarkable. Above the bank, grass bends beneath the gusts. Down here, the air still moves, but its sharp edge has softened. You hear branches rubbing overhead, and the gentle shifting of your companions behind you. Your horse exhales again, sending another white cloud into the gathering darkness. Perhaps this place will work. Perhaps there is something better farther along. That uncertainty is part of every winter evening outdoors. Once darkness arrives, changing your mind becomes harder, colder, and considerably more annoying. So you keep looking. The final strip of daylight remains along the western horizon, glowing faintly beneath a deepening blue sky. Stars are beginning to appear overhead, sharp and unusually bright. Soon the landscape will become mostly shadow. Before that happens, you must learn exactly what this creek, these trees, and this low bank can offer. The first lesson of the freezing plains is already becoming clear. You survive the night before you sleep. You survive it through decisions made while daylight remains, while your fingers still work, and while the landscape can still be read. The wind continues beyond the shelter. It moves across miles of prairie, cold and patient, searching every exposed ridge and hollow here beside the creek. You begin studying the ground more carefully, because choosing the right few yards may matter more than travelling another mile, and that is where your winter night truly begins. You remain beside the shallow creek while the last useful daylight settles across the plains. The sheltered bank has already weakened the wind. Yet you are not ready to stop searching. A tolerable place for several minutes may become a miserable sleeping place after midnight. The difference can be surprisingly small. Perhaps another bend provides thicker brush. Perhaps a nearby hollow traps bitter air. Perhaps those cottonwoods offer firewood, while another stand farther downstream offers both wood and better protection. You lead your horse slowly forward, letting your eyes adjust to the fading light. The ground beneath your feet tells its own quiet story. Frozen soil feels firm through your footwear, while patches of old snow crunch softly near the creek. Some areas are exposed and dry because the wind has repeatedly swept them clean. Other patches hold pale drifts. These patterns matter because snow reveals how air moves around obstacles. A ridge that looks insignificant can redirect wind enough to create calmer ground behind it. You begin reading those shapes almost instinctively. People who spend much of their lives outdoors rarely experience landscape as simple scenery. Hills, waterways, trees, grasses, animal trails, clouds, and prevailing winds become practical information. The Comanche were especially adapted to enormous distances. By the 18th and 19th centuries, their world stretched across broad portions of the southern Great Plains. Their movements connected areas that today fall within several American states. This country contained tremendous environmental variety. There were open grasslands, river valleys, broken uplands, wooded stream corridors, and broad plains where shelter could appear frustratingly scarce. Winter travellers needed to understand these differences long before they began thinking about sleep. You pause near several cottonwoods. Their trunks rise darkly against the remaining light, while thin branches tremble overhead. Dry leaves trapped beneath nearby brush produce a brittle rustling whenever the wind reaches them. You smell damp bark and cold soil. The scent is stronger here than on the open prairie. It suggests moisture, something valuable during travel, although moisture can also become troublesome when temperatures fall. Your companion steps closer to the creek. Ice has formed along quieter sections, while darker water remains visible where the current moves faster. You hear a faint liquid sound beneath the crust. That sound is encouraging. Water can be dealt with later, but first you need to understand the wind. You move several yards away from the bank and immediately feel stronger air pressing against your face. Then you step behind the trees. The difference is noticeable, though imperfect. Cottonwoods do not form a solid wall, especially after losing their leaves. Still, trunks, brush, banks, and irregular terrain interrupt airflow together. Several weak barriers can create meaningful protection. This principle would have been familiar to many peoples living and travelling across the plains. Historical accounts repeatedly show indigenous communities selecting camps with practical access to water, grazing, wood, and shelter. Large Comanche camps often occupied river valleys or similar favourable areas. A small travelling group, however, could make use of much less. You need only enough. The question is what enough means tonight. Historians do not always agree about how frequently small Comanche war parties used fires during dangerous journeys. Circumstances varied enormously according to weather, location, purpose, enemies, and available fuel. Some situations encouraged concealment, others made warmth more important. There is rarely a single answer that fits every journey, which is why the landscape itself becomes part of your decision. Tonight, the severe cold pushes you toward greater protection. You continue downstream. Your horse follows with patient reluctance, occasionally lowering its head toward dried vegetation. Its hooves make dull sounds against frozen ground. You notice the animal turning slightly away from stronger gusts. That behavior is useful. Horses naturally seek positions that reduce exposure, and experienced riders can observe where animals prefer to stand. Livestock behavior is not magical weather forecasting, of course, but it can reinforce what your skin already tells you. The wind has direction. The land can redirect it. You find a bend where the creek has cut more deeply into the earth. One bank rises above your shoulder, with brush growing thickly along its upper edge. Here the air becomes quieter. You can still hear the wind passing overhead, producing a low rushing sound through bare branches. Yet your clothing no longer snaps sharply against your body. That is promising. You kneel and press your hand against the ground. It is cold and hard, but relatively dry beneath a thin covering of grass and leaves. Dryness matters more than comfort suggests. Wet insulation loses effectiveness, and moisture conducts heat away from your body more quickly than dry air trapped within clothing or bedding. You therefore treat every suspicious patch of damp earth with considerable disrespect. Winter gives you enough problems already. There is a slightly higher shelf several yards from the water. It remains below the surrounding bank while avoiding the lowest part of the drainage. That balance attracts your attention. Cold air is denser than warm air and can settle into low terrain under certain calm conditions. Yet tonight's wind complicates that simple picture because air continues moving through the landscape. You cannot rely on one rule. Instead, you combine observations. You feel the wind against your cheek. You inspect where snow has accumulated. You look for flood debris that might indicate unpleasant ground. You examine available wood. Nearby branches have fallen beneath several trees, and dead material lies tangled among the brush. Some pieces are damp, but others appear dry enough to burn. You snap a thin branch. It breaks with a crisp sound. That tiny crack seems surprisingly loud after the constant whisper of the wind. Your horse lifts its head briefly, then returns to investigating the grass. A curious plain survival detail concerns fuel selection. Travellers could not always depend upon neat piles of dry firewood waiting beside a campsite. Wooded streams offered branches and dead timber, but treeless areas required alternatives. Dried animal dung was sometimes burned across plains environments when conventional wood was scarce. It sounds rather unglamorous. History frequently is. Dried buffalo dung could provide useful fuel on open country where large trees were absent. Its availability depended upon location, season, weather, and the movement of enormous herds. Tonight, fortunately, you have wood. You also have brush that can help interrupt the wind. Yet you resist the temptation to declare victory immediately. You walk farther around the bend. The ground rises gently toward open prairie, giving you a view of the surrounding country before darkness completely closes. You study distant shapes for movement. Nothing obvious appears. The horizon remains empty. That does not guarantee safety, but it allows your attention to return toward weather and shelter. A pale band of cloud has formed toward the north. You watch it carefully. Experienced plains travellers learn to treat northern weather with respect because sudden cold fronts could move astonishingly fast. The famous winter norther could send temperatures dropping dramatically within hours. Such events were dangerous precisely because conditions changed quickly. The Comanche did not possess thermometers during much of the period you are imagining. They did possess something more immediately useful for travel-accumulated observation. Cloud shape mattered. Wind direction mattered. The smell and feel of changing air mattered. Animals mattered too. Some historical observers described indigenous plains people as possessing almost supernatural environmental awareness. That language often reveals more about astonished outsiders than about anything mysterious. There was no magic involved. There was practice. Imagine spending thousands of nights noticing how weather behaves. Patterns invisible to an occasional traveller gradually become familiar. Even mistakes become lessons. You return toward the creek shelf and notice another clue. Snow rests unevenly beneath the brush, forming a thicker strip along one side. That accumulation indicates where wind has deposited drifting snow. You choose the opposite side for sleeping. The decision seems almost laughably small, perhaps only several steps across frozen ground, yet those steps can reduce exposure for hours. Your companions have reached similar conclusions. Nobody needs to announce that the campsite is perfect because perfection is not available. Instead, everyone begins moving with the quiet efficiency that comes when searching finally becomes preparation. Your horse is led toward protected ground. Equipment is lowered carefully. Leather creaks as straps loosen. And small pieces of gear produce muted knocks against one another. The smells of hide, horse sweat, and cold vegetation mingle in the sheltered air. Your fingers sting slightly. That sensation reminds you not to waste time. Once physical work begins, movement will help restore warmth. Before then, you take one final look beyond the creek. The prairie has become blue-grey beneath the evening sky. Grass moves like dark water whenever the wind crosses it. Behind you, the bank remains comparatively calm. This is the quiet intelligence of campsite selection. You have not stopped the winter, and you have not changed the temperature. You have changed your relationship with the wind. That alone can preserve considerable warmth. You look upward through bare cottonwood branches. More stars have appeared, and their brightness suggests a long, cold night ahead. The landscape now feels less empty than before. Every slope has meaning. Every patch of snow contains information. Every tree changes the air around it. You begin to understand why survival knowledge cannot easily be reduced to one clever trick. It consists of dozens of small observations, each unimpressive by itself. Together, they create safety. The place has finally been chosen. Now the work changes. You must turn this protected bend in an ordinary winter creek into somewhere human beings can remain until morning. The bank gives you a beginning, but shelter will require hands, hides, brush, and careful arrangement. Darkness settles completely as you reach for your equipment. Darkness has almost swallowed the creek when you begin examining the chosen ground more closely. The bank protects you from the strongest wind, but protection alone does not make a sleeping place. Your body will spend the entire night producing heat, and the landscape will spend those same hours trying to carry that heat away. You therefore look at the campsite differently now. The trees are no longer scenery, the brush becomes material. Dry grass becomes insulation, while every hollow in the earth becomes either useful shelter or an inconvenient pocket of colder air. You begin with the wind. It passes above the bank with a steady rushing sound, occasionally bending the highest branches down beside the creek. Only irregular gusts reach you. That difference feels luxurious. You stand quietly for several moments, allowing exposed skin to detect small currents. The air touching your cheek is weak compared with what you felt on open ground. Your companions make similar observations. A sleeping position directly against the bank seems tempting. Yet the earth there feels damp. Another spot lies beneath thicker brush. Although overhead branches could drop snow or ice, nothing is perfect. You choose the driest protected shelf. The decision reflects a broader reality of winter travel among the Comanche. Mobility depended upon adapting quickly to whatever landscape was available, rather than demanding one standardized campsite. Large residential camps could include substantial shelters. A small group traveling rapidly carried fewer comforts and relied more heavily upon portable equipment, local materials, and knowledge of terrain. The precise arrangement depended upon circumstances. Tonight, circumstances encourage simplicity. You need something practical before your hands become clumsy. Your horse stands nearby, occasionally shifting its weight. Its breathing sounds deep and slow in the cold air. You can smell the animal clearly now. Warm horse sweat, leather, dry grass, and frozen earth combine into a strangely intimate winter scent. The smell reminds you that the camp includes more than sleeping humans. You remove equipment carefully. Nothing is thrown casually onto the snow. Leather stiffens when cold, and small objects become remarkably irritating when misplaced in darkness. You arrange what you need within easy reach. The Comanche reputation for horsemanship is well deserved. By the 18th century, horses had become central to hunting, transportation, warfare, trade, status, and everyday movement. A warrior's equipment therefore had to work around mounted life. Bulky possessions reduced speed. Portable possessions mattered. Buffalo hides could serve several purposes, including bedding, insulation, coverings, and components of larger shelters. Blankets acquired through trade also became increasingly important over time. You run your fingers across a heavy robe. The outer surface feels cold. Inside, trapped air among the fibers offers much better insulation. That trapped air is one of your strongest allies tonight. Before using the robe, however, you need protection beneath it. The ground is patient. It can drain heat from you for hours without making any dramatic announcement. Anyone who has slept directly upon cold earth quickly understands this lesson. You begin collecting dry vegetation. The grass near the creek is stiff and pale, with frost along its edges. Some material beneath the brush remains relatively dry because branches have protected it from snow. You gather it carefully. Your companions add small branches and leaves where suitable. None of this looks especially impressive. That is the point. A thick layer of dry plant material creates tiny pockets of air between your body and the frozen ground. It does not need to resemble a comfortable mattress. It merely needs to slow heat loss. Mainstream historical evidence shows that plains peoples made extensive use of hides, robes, bedding, and natural materials to manage cold environments. Exact practices differed among communities and circumstances. You should avoid imagining a universal formula. One traveller might have more robes, another might carry a blanket. Someone travelling urgently might possess very little beyond clothing and essential equipment. Weather could also change faster than preparations allowed. Historians still debate many details concerning temporary Comanche camps used by small travelling parties. Written observers usually described larger camps, dramatic encounters, or military events rather than ordinary sleeping arrangements. The quiet routines received less attention, yet quiet routines keep people alive. You continue building the sleeping surface. The smell of crushed dry grass rises beneath your hands. It has a dusty sweetness that seems almost warm despite the temperature. A twig catches against your sleeve. You remove it rather than discovering it beneath your ribs at midnight. Historical authenticity does not require unnecessary suffering. Gentle sarcasm has its place. You then consider the exposed side of the sleeping area. The creek bank protects one direction, while tangled brush helps along another. A remaining gap faces moving air. You collect additional brush and position it where it can break that current. You are not constructing a fortress. You're interrupting airflow. Even a modest windbreak can make a noticeable difference because moving air continually replaces the thin layer of warmer air near your body and clothing. Stop that replacement, and warmth lingers longer. The principle is simple. Applying it well requires experience. One curious historical detail is that travellers sometimes used equipment itself as part of their protection. Saddles, packs, hides, and other objects could contribute to a temporary windbreak when natural shelter was limited. Your possessions are not decorative. Everything earns its journey. You position equipment near the protected area without blocking necessary movement. A saddle resting at the right angle can disrupt a draft while remaining available for morning. Practicality governs the camp. There is another concern. You look upward. The cottonwood branches above you are mostly clear, but several carry patches of old snow, A campsite beneath heavy accumulated snow could become unpleasant if wind shakes it loose during the night. You move slightly aside. Again, the adjustment is tiny. Again, it matters. Your companions begin gathering fuel from farther along the creek. The snapping of dead branches travels sharply through the darkness. You hear footsteps against frozen leaves. Beyond the bank, the wind continues its endless movement across the prairie. The sound seems distant now, though it's only several yards away. You crouch beside the sleeping place. Your fingertips are becoming numb. You tuck them beneath your clothing for several moments until sensation returns. Cold hands make simple tasks slower, which makes exposure longer. That cycle can become dangerous. Experienced winter travelers manage discomfort before it becomes incapacity. They adjust clothing, move their bodies, protect exposed skin, and complete necessary work early. You stand and move briskly. Blood returns toward your fingers. Your breathing deepens, and warmth spreads beneath your clothing. Physical activity provides useful heat, but sweating creates another problem. You therefore avoid exhausting yourself. Moisture trapped against the body can become dangerous once movement stops. The goal is warmth without becoming soaked in perspiration. This balance sounds straightforward beside a modern fireplace. Out here, it requires judgment. The temperature continues falling. Frost now coats exposed vegetation more heavily, giving the creek bank a faint silver appearance beneath starlight. Your breath hangs briefly before disappearing. You hear one horse snort. Another stamps against the ground. Animals generate considerable body heat. Yet they also need protection from prolonged wind. Their coats help enormously, but severe weather still demands attention. You check their position. They stand below the bank where airflow is weaker. Their dark shapes seem almost enormous in the night. Everything has found its place. Not permanently, only for tonight. That temporary quality defines much of the camp. Nothing should take hours to construct because morning may require rapid movement. Comanche mobility was one of their great advantages across the plains. Camps, equipment, and daily habits developed within a world where movement could be frequent. A warrior traveling separately needed even greater efficiency. You return to the sleeping area and spread the first covering across the dry vegetation. It settles unevenly at first. You smooth it with both hands. Beneath the material, grass compresses into a softer layer. The cold ground remains present, but no longer feels quite so immediate. You sit briefly. The improvement is obvious. Your weight settles into the bedding while the bank blocks most of the wind. For the first time since dismounting, you can imagine remaining here for several hours. Still, something is missing. Warmth. Your companions return carrying dead wood. They place it near a cleared patch where sparks can be controlled and where heat might reach the sleeping area without threatening robes or equipment. Now another decision begins. A fire can transform the camp. It can warm hands, heat food, dry materials, provide light, and make the night feel smaller. It can also consume precious fuel, throw sparks, create smoke, and reveal your position. The choice cannot be casual. You look beyond the shelter toward the dark prairie. Nothing moves except grass under starlight. The cold press is closer. Tonight, warmth appears worth the risk. You take a dry branch and test it between your hands. It snaps cleanly, promising better fuel than the damp pieces nearer the water. Around you, the campsite has finally taken shape. The creek bank forms one wall. Brush forms another. Dry vegetation separates your body from frozen earth, while hides and equipment wait nearby. Horses stand in protected darkness. It is modest shelter. Yet the difference between exposed prairie and this little pocket beside the creek already feels enormous. You settle onto one knee near the prepared fire site. The wind murmurs overhead. Your fingers reach toward the materials that will produce the first small flame, and suddenly the entire winter night seems to depend upon something no larger than your hand. You kneel beside the prepared ground while your companions finish arranging the little camp around you. Before any flame is encouraged into life, there is still shelter work to complete. Darkness has settled fully across the creek, and the temperature continues its slow descent. Above the bank, the prairie wind moves steadily through the grass, here below it. You can hear that wind more clearly than you can feel it. That simple difference confirms that the evening's careful choices are already paying you back. The campsite is small by necessity. A travelling party cannot carry a permanent home across every mile of prairie. Instead, you use portable belongings together with whatever the landscape provides. Hides become coverings. Brush becomes a barrier. Saddles and packs become useful pieces of the camp rather than equipment waiting politely for morning. Every object can perform more than one job. This practicality fits the mobile world of Comanche life. Comanche families could live in portable hide lodges designed for plains conditions. These structures could be dismantled, transported, and raised again when a larger camp moved. You do not have that luxury tonight. You're imagining a smaller party away from its main encampment, carrying only what speed and horses reasonably allow. Your temporary shelter therefore depends upon improvisation. You pull another heavy covering from the equipment. The material has become stiff with cold, especially along exposed edges. When you shake it open, a faint smell of hide and old smoke reaches your nose. That smell feels reassuring. Smoke clings stubbornly to materials used around fires. After repeated nights, it becomes part of the scent of camp itself. You spread the covering where it can strengthen the existing windbreak. One edge is secured against brush. Another is weighted with equipment. You keep it low rather than trying to create an ambitious wall. A tall covering would catch the wind and become troublesome. Low shelter works better. The idea is not to seal yourself completely from the outside air. You need ventilation, especially once a fire begins burning nearby. Instead, you create a protected pocket. The bank handles much of the work. Brush disrupts additional airflow. Your portable coverings close the most exposed remaining angle. The result looks irregular, but winter rarely awards points for architecture. Comfort has a practical shape tonight. You step backward and study the arrangement. A small opening remains toward the area where the fire will be placed. Heat can travel toward the sleeping space while smoke has somewhere to escape. That matters greatly. A badly positioned shelter can collect smoke until your eyes water, and breathing becomes miserable. You do not want to spend midnight choosing between freezing and coughing. Your companions adjust several branches. The dry wood scratches together softly. One man places a saddle along the lower edge of the covering, helping block a narrow gap where cold air continues slipping through. You test the gap with your hand. The draft has weakened. Small victories accumulate. One mainstream fact about plain shelters is their sophisticated relationship with airflow. Larger hide lodges used by many plains peoples were not merely cones of material thrown around poles. Their form helped manage wind, ventilation, smoke, and interior warmth. Exact Comanche lodge construction varied across time and available materials, but portability remained fundamental. A community following buffalo herds needed architecture capable of traveling. Tonight's shelter is far simpler. Still, the same environmental logic remains. Control the wind. Preserve dry insulation. Allow smoke to escape. Keep essential objects nearby. Your world has suddenly shrunk from miles of prairie to several carefully arranged yards. You begin collecting more grass. The material crunches softly beneath your hands. Frost melts slightly where your warmer fingers touch it. So you favor vegetation protected beneath overhanging brush. Dry material is precious. You carry it back and thicken the bedding layer. The grass smells earthy and faintly sweet after being disturbed. Tiny fragments cling to your sleeves. You press down with one palm. The surface gives slightly. It will never resemble a feather bed. But that is hardly tonight's standard. You simply want distance between living warmth and frozen soil. The quirky part is how humble good insulation can appear. A pile of ordinary dry grass may contribute more to comfort than an impressive object carried from far away. History often rewards the material everyone forgets to mention. Grass does not receive heroic portraits. It still keeps your back warmer. You place another hide across the bedding. Your fingers travel over worn areas where repeated use has softened the material. Such objects represent considerable labour. Preparing hides requires skill and time. They are valuable possessions, not disposable camping supplies. You therefore keep them away from damp ground whenever possible. The grass underneath helps create that separation. A companion checks the horses again. You hear tack shifting in the darkness. The animals remain relatively calm, though one occasionally paws at the ground searching for accessible vegetation. Their presence influences the camp's arrangement. You want them close enough to monitor without allowing restless hooves to enter the sleeping area. Losing a horse during distant travel could become far more serious than losing a comfortable night's rest. Mobility is security. Without the animals, tomorrow changes completely. You listen beyond the creek. No hoofbeats answer. No human voices travel across the prairie. Only the wind continues. The silence encourages you to keep working. There remains uncertainty about exactly what lightweight shelter arrangements Comanche warriors preferred during short winter journeys. Accounts written by outsiders often concentrate on warfare, diplomacy, buffalo hunting, or larger residential camps. Routine discomfort rarely impressed chroniclers. Researchers therefore reconstruct smaller details cautiously by comparing historical observations, material culture, environmental conditions, and related plains practices. You should imagine variation. A warrior might sleep with minimal shelter during favourable weather. Severe cold could encourage considerably more preparation. A group expecting danger might sacrifice comfort for concealment. Another travelling peacefully might build a more visible camp. Tonight the weather has the strongest vote. You pull your outer clothing more tightly around your neck. The air has sharpened. Your nose feels cold, and your cheeks sting whenever you turn toward the opening. Inside the sheltered area, however, the difference remains noticeable. You crouch low. Warmth from your own body seems to linger slightly longer when the move-in air cannot reach you directly. That is precisely what you need. You begin arranging personal equipment around the sleeping place. Frequently used items stay within reach. Things needed only tomorrow are secured farther back. Nothing should require searching blindly at midnight. Cold makes inconvenience feel surprisingly dramatic. A missing strap in daylight is annoying. A missing strap with numb fingers beneath winter stars can become a personal insult from the universe. You make sure everything is where expected. Then you inspect the shelter once more. The hide covering moves slightly with each stronger gust, but its weighted edges remain secure. Brush trembles above it. The bank remains dark and solid behind you. A few snow crystals drift down from branches and settle upon the ground. One lands against your wrist. It melts almost instantly. The sensation reminds you how much heat your skin continuously gives away. You cover the exposed area again. Your companions bring additional fuel closer. Some pieces are thick enough to burn slowly once the fire develops. Smaller twigs are kept dry for starting it. Fuel is arranged rather than scattered. Efficiency matters because nobody wants to wander through brush repeatedly after midnight. You can almost feel the camp becoming organized. There is a place for sleeping, a place for equipment, a protected area for the horses, a controlled location for fire, a route toward water. This organization reduces unnecessary movement once everyone becomes tired. Fatigue is already arriving. You feel it in your shoulders after the day's riding. Your legs carry that peculiar heaviness produced by hours in the saddle. Yet you cannot sleep immediately. Winter preparation rewards patience. A rushed camp may save 15 minutes before sunset and steal several hours of comfort afterward. You sit upon the bedding again. This time you lean slightly backward against the protected side. The grass compresses beneath you. The hide blocks the dampness. The wind becomes a distant sound rather than a hand pressing constantly against your clothing. You breathe slowly. White vapor appears in front of your face. The shelter is not warm yet. That distinction is important. Shelter does not create heat by itself. It helps preserve what your body and eventually the fire produce. You rub your hands together. Friction offers only brief comfort. Soon you will need something better. The final pieces of dry tinder are placed near the fire site. Thin twigs rest above them, followed by slightly larger branches. You can smell the dusty plant material. Everything is ready. For a few seconds, nobody moves quickly. The night feels immense beyond your little protected bend. Stars shine between cottonwood branches, bright against the black sky. Somewhere upstream, ice shifts with a faint cracking sound. Your horse exhales. The wind answers overhead. You look at the shelter assembled from earth. Vegetation, hides, and ordinary travelling equipment. It is temporary, imperfect, and remarkably effective compared with open prairie. This is how endurance often begins, not with extraordinary suffering, not with ignoring the cold. It begins by refusing to give the cold unnecessary advantages. You turn toward the waiting tinder. The camp has walls enough for tonight. Now it needs heat. You lean closer to the waiting tinder, shielding it instinctively even though the creek bank already blocks most of the wind. The camp around you has become almost invisible beyond a few dark shapes. Horses stand quietly near the brush, hides lie across the prepared bedding, and bundles of collected wood wait within reach. Now the smallest materials receive your full attention. A winter fire begins modestly, and impatience can ruin it faster than cold. Your fingers work carefully. The first ember seems almost insignificant against the surrounding darkness. You protect it while feeding it dry material, allowing warmth to build rather than demanding immediate flames. A faint smell of smoke rises. Then comes a tiny orange glow. You add another fragment of tinder and watch the ember spread. For several moments, the entire camp seems focused upon something smaller than a coin. A flame finally appears. It bends once toward the opening, straightens, and begins licking around the thinnest twigs. Their surfaces darken before catching. The sound is delicate. Tiny cracks emerge from the growing fire, almost hidden beneath the wind moving above the bank. You hold your hands near the flame without crowding it. Warmth touches your fingertips. That first sensation feels wonderful. You resist the temptation to build an enormous blaze because a good winter fire does not need to resemble a burning building. Fuel is finite, and excessive flames consume it rapidly. Comanche travelers understood scarcity. Across wooded waterways, fallen timber might be available in useful quantities on treeless stretches of the plains. However, conventional firewood could become difficult to find. That reality shaped camp decisions. Mainstream historical accounts from the Great Plains frequently mention the use of dried buffalo dung as fuel when wood was scarce. It burned well enough for cooking and warmth under suitable conditions. The material was common where herds had recently passed. Of course, it lacked romance. A storyteller might prefer fragrant cedar logs stacked beside every campsite. The prairie sometimes offered dried dung instead, and practical people did not argue with the prairie. Tonight your creek provides dead wood. You place several slightly larger branches across the established flame. They begin smoking before their edges finally catch. The smoke smells woody and dry. Occasionally, a stronger puff reaches your face and makes your eyes sting. You shift your position rather than complain to the atmosphere. The fire gradually strengthens. Orange light spreads across the creek bank, revealing textures that darkness had erased. Frosted grass shines along the ground. The hides look warmer simply because they are illuminated. Your companions' faces appear and disappear as flames move. Beyond them, the horses remain dark silhouettes. You notice something immediately. The fire changes more than temperature. A few minutes ago, the night seemed enormous. Now the circle of light creates a smaller human world within it. Your attention settles inward. The psychological comfort of fire is difficult to measure. Yet anyone spending a freezing night outdoors understands it quickly. Light gives you a center. Heat gives you a reason to stop moving. The familiar sounds of burning wood replace some of the emptiness around you. Still, practical concerns remain more important than sentiment. You inspect the flame's position. Heat travels toward the sleeping area while most smoke rises beyond the covering. The windbreak prevents stronger gusts from scattering sparks. That arrangement required planning before ignition. A poorly placed fire could send smoke directly beneath your shelter. Worse, sparks could land on valuable hides or dry vegetation. You keep the immediate fire area clear. Bare earth surrounds the flame. Loose grass has been pushed away. You also avoid placing the fire so close that sleeping becomes unsafe. Warmth is welcome, but waking because your bedding has begun smoking would be an embarrassing failure of campcraft. There is a balance. You add another branch. Its bark crackles. A shower of tiny sparks rises briefly before fading against the dark air. You watch them carefully. Fire requires attention throughout the night, particularly when wind conditions change. Someone may need to add fuel, reposition wood, or reduce flames. That responsibility fits naturally with nighttime watchfulness. Not everyone must remain awake constantly, but someone usually notices. Exactly how Comanche war parties organize nighttime fire tending is difficult to reconstruct consistently. Historical descriptions vary, and many journeys left no detailed record. Researchers disagree about how often fires were avoided entirely for tactical reasons. Some parties traveling through dangerous territory almost certainly minimized visible signs. Others could use fires when circumstances made concealment less urgent. Tonight, severe cold justifies the small blaze. You keep it deliberately low, from a distance. The creek bank and brush help conceal much of its light. Smoke also disperses quickly into the dark sky. You step several yards toward the open prairie. Immediately, the wind feels stronger. You turn and look back. The fire is surprisingly difficult to see from this angle because the bank blocks the lowest glow. Only occasional flickers appear between brush and branches. That is reassuring. You return to the protected side. Warm air meets your face as you crouch near the flames. Your cheeks begin tingling as chilled skin warms. Your fingers ache slightly. The sensation is unpleasant but temporary. You extend your hands gradually rather than pressing them dangerously close to the fire. Numb skin can be injured because it does not judge heat properly. Experience teaches caution. You remove one glove or covering briefly and inspect your fingers. Their movement is improving. Then you protect them again. A companion begins preparing something to eat while another checks the horses. The camp is becoming functional rather than merely survivable. You can hear quiet chewing from one animal. Leather creaks when another shifts. The creek murmurs beneath thin ice nearby. These sounds blend with the fire until the place feels almost peaceful. Almost. The wind still reminds you where you are. A stronger gust reaches down into the drainage and pushes smoke sideways. Everyone pauses briefly to see whether the shelter catches too much. The smoke passes. The coverings remain stable. You make one minor adjustment to the windbreak. That is enough. Winter camping often consists of these tiny corrections. You rarely solve every problem permanently. You manage them. A fire burns lower, so you add fuel. A draft appears, so you close a gap. A road becomes damp, so you move it. Your feet become cold, so you restore circulation before discomfort becomes serious. None of this sounds heroic. That may explain why such knowledge survives unevenly in dramatic historical narratives. Chroniclers preferred battles, treaties, famous leaders, and sweeping migrations. They rarely recorded who moved a branch at midnight. Yet ordinary actions make extraordinary histories possible. The Comanche ability to travel over great distances depended upon thousands of such practical decisions. Horses, food, water, weather, equipment, and human energy all required management. Winter magnified every mistake. You place a thicker piece of wood across the coals. It catches slowly. This is the fuel you want later because thicker pieces burn longer and require less constant attention. Small flames race through thin twigs, while substantial wood releases heat more gradually. You're effectively planning hours ahead. The quirky fuel economy continues. You do not burn everything immediately simply because you are cold now. Some wood must remain dry for the deepest part of the night. Temperatures often reach their lowest point near dawn. That means your future self will appreciate restraint. You stack selected pieces beneath partial cover, where frost and stray moisture are less likely to settle heavily. A few dry twigs remain separated. They could help revive weakened coals. The arrangement feels almost domestic. There is something amusing about housekeeping beside a frozen creek, while the prairie stretches empty for miles. Still, organization reduces effort. You settle near the fire and let warmth penetrate your outer clothing. The difference between your front and back becomes noticeable. Your face feels comfortable. Your shoulders remain cool. You rotate slightly. Humans have been performing this slow campfire dance for an extremely long time. The flames illuminate your breath. White vapor appears, glows orange for an instant, then disappears. Smoke rises beyond it in thin grey strands. The smell settles into your hair and clothing. Tomorrow, everything will carry it. That is hardly a problem. Smoke can also help dry materials when they are positioned carefully, although holding damp items too close risks damage. Tonight, most equipment has remained reasonably dry. You are fortunate. Snow would complicate everything. Freezing rain would be worse. For now, the sky remains clear enough to expose countless stars. The cold seems to sharpen them. You look upward through branches. There is no artificial glow beyond the horizon, only darkness and starlight stretching across the plains. For Comanche travelers, the sky could provide direction, seasonal information, and familiarity during long journeys. Yet tonight you need no grand astronomical lesson. You simply notice its beauty. Then another gust arrives. You lower your gaze toward the fire. Beauty has limits when your toes are cold. The flames have settled into a steady pattern. Beneath them, red coals begin forming. This is better than a towering blaze. Coals provide concentrated heat and make later cooking or warming easier. They also allow the fire to remain useful without broadcasting huge flames above the creek bank. You move closer to the bedding. Heat reaches it gently. The shelter catches some warmth while allowing smoke to escape through the open side. Your earlier preparation now makes sense as one connected system. Terrain blocks the strongest wind. Brush weakens smaller currents. Dry grass separates you from frozen ground. Heights trap warm air. The fire adds controlled heat. Each element supports the others. No single trick saves you. That is perhaps the most important lesson of the evening. Survival on a freezing plain comes from layers of ordinary decisions made correctly enough. The fire cracks softly. One branch collapses into glowing coals, sending several sparks upward. You use a stick to settle the wood into a more efficient position. Warmth spreads again. Your shoulders relax. For the first time since the sun disappeared, you feel that the cold has stopped advancing against you. It has not gone anywhere. Beyond the bank, the wind continues sweeping across the grass. Frost continues thickening on exposed surfaces. The temperature continues falling. But here, inside this little arrangement of earth, brush, hides, animals, fuel, and human judgment, you have created a temporary boundary. The night remains powerful. It simply does not get everything it wants. You reach toward the heavy buffalo robe waiting beside your bedding. Its dense fibers catch the firelight as your hand closes around the edge. Soon the fire will no longer be your only defense. You lift the heavy buffalo robe from beside the bedding and feel its weight settle across your forearms. The outer surface is cool from the surrounding air, but the dense hair beneath feels completely different. Your fingers disappear into thick fibers that trap pockets of air between them, beside the low fire. Those fibers take on a warm amber color. Beyond the shelter, frost continues gathering across the creek bank. Yet this single object offers another layer between your body and the freezing night. You shake the robe gently. A faint smoky smell rises from it. There is also the deeper scent of worked hide, dry grass, and countless earlier camps. Such smells would have been ordinary parts of life rather than historical curiosities. The robe is not merely bedding. It represents an entire relationship between plains people and the buffalo herds that supported them. Food, shelter, clothing, containers, tools, and many other necessities could come from the animal. Few resources were wasted. For Comanche communities, buffalo hunting became deeply connected with mounted life after horses expanded hunting possibilities. Skilled riders could pursue herds more efficiently across enormous distances. The hides required considerable labor afterward. A fresh hide did not magically become a soft winter robe. It needed careful preparation, scraping, working, drying, and repeated treatment. That labour mattered tonight. You place part of the robe across your legs. Warmth begins building slowly. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no sudden wave of heat because insulation does not create warmth by itself. Instead, it slows the escape of heat your body already produces. That distinction explains why good bedding matters. You are the furnace. The robe is the wall around it. Dense buffalo hair can hold considerable still air, particularly when kept dry and uncompressed. Air conducts heat poorly compared with many solid materials, making those trapped pockets valuable. You pull the robe farther around yourself. Your knees immediately feel less exposed. The sensation is deeply comforting. You have spent hours with wind pressing through layers of clothing. Now the heavy material rests quietly around you, and your muscles begin relaxing. A companion adjusts another covering nearby. The soft scrape of hide against dry grass mixes with the steady crackle of the fire. Horses breathe beyond the edge of the light. The camp feels smaller again. Buffalo robes were important trade goods as well as practical household possessions. By the 19th century, robes moved through extensive commercial networks linking indigenous communities. Traders, frontier settlements, and distant markets. Their value could be substantial. For you tonight, their value is wonderfully simple. They are warm. A good winter hide usually retained the animal's thick seasonal coat. Buffalo developed dense winter air suited to life on exposed grasslands where severe cold and wind were normal. Humans learned to benefit from that adaptation. You run a hand through the fibers. They feel coarse in some places and softer nearer the underlayer. Individual hairs do not seem impressive. Together, they create remarkable protection. That pattern resembles your entire camp. One branch is insignificant. One handful of grass seems useless. One sheltered bank appears modest. Combine enough small advantages, and freezing darkness becomes manageable. You shift closer to the fire. The robe catches warmth on its exposed surface while insulating your legs beneath. You avoid placing it close enough for sparks to become dangerous. Prepared hides represent too much work to treat carelessly. A glowing ember lands several feet away. You watch it fade harmlessly against bare soil. Your companions remain equally attentive. One curious detail about buffalo robes involves the enormous variety hidden beneath that simple name. Thickness, season, preparation quality, wear. An intended use could change how a hide performed. Not every robe was identical. Winter hides were especially valued because the animals carried their fullest coats during colder months. A hide taken at another season could provide less dense insulation. Even within winter materials, condition mattered. A worn robe might have thin areas. A damp robe becomes less useful. A carefully maintained one could remain precious for years. You inspect the edge near your hand. The material shows evidence of long use. Small repairs remind you that possessions were maintained rather than casually replaced. There is something quietly reassuring about repaired equipment. It means the object has already survived other journeys. Historians and ethnographers have recorded extensive information about buffalo hide processing among plains peoples, but specific Comanche techniques changed across time and circumstance. Some details remain difficult to assign confidently to particular periods. Researchers continue discussing how practices move between neighbouring communities. Plains societies traded, intermarried, fought, observed, borrowed, and adapted ideas constantly. Cultural boundaries were never sealed containers. You should therefore resist imagining every useful technique as belonging exclusively to one people. Knowledge travelled too. The fire lowers slightly. You place another piece of wood onto the coals. A brief orange flame climbs along its cracked surface. Warm light moves across the robe. Your hands now feel comfortable enough for careful work, so you begin checking the rest of your bedding. The lower layer remains dry. That is important because pressure compresses insulation. If you lie directly on the buffalo robe, your body weight flattens much of the hair beneath you. The compressed portion traps less air. This explains why the dry grass prepared earlier remains useful. It provides another insulating layer beneath the hide. You add a small amount where the bedding feels thin. The adjustment takes less than a minute. It may improve several hours of sleep. You sit again. Better. Your back no longer seems connected directly to the frozen earth. The cold remains present, but it feels farther away. You arrange the buffalo robe so it can wrap around your sides rather than merely resting on top. Open gaps allow warm air to escape. Closing those gaps matters. You tuck one edge near your legs, another folds around your hip. The upper portion remains loose enough to adjust during the night. Your face must stay exposed enough for comfortable breathing. It is tempting to bury everything beneath thick material when the air becomes bitter, yet damp breath can introduce moisture into bedding. Moisture is unwelcome. You keep your mouth and nose near the opening. Each exhalation forms a pale cloud above the robe. The vapor catches firelight before drifting away. You smell smoke again. It has become stronger as the fire settles into coals, though the shelter still vents properly. The scent combines with buffalo hair in a way that feels unmistakably connected to camp. Outside, the creek makes another quiet cracking noise. Ice is tightening as temperatures fall. The sound travels through the stillness and disappears. You listen for several seconds. Nothing follows. The horses remain calm. You pull the robe higher. Now only your shoulders and head remain fully exposed. The difference is remarkable. Your feet begin warming because heat generated by your torso is no longer escaping as rapidly from the lower body. Circulation does the rest. You flex your toes. They respond normally. That simple movement is reassuring. Cold feet can become a persistent problem during winter travel, particularly when footwear becomes damp or circulation is restricted. You will deal with that problem more carefully later. For now, the robe provides broad protection. One companion sits opposite the fire, wrapped in another covering. His outline appears bulky beneath layers. Nobody looks graceful. Grace has retired for the evening. Warmth is more useful. The image differs considerably from romantic paintings of warriors standing dramatically against blizzards with uncovered heads and decorative clothing moving in the wind. Real cold encourages less theatrical behavior. You cover yourself. You protect your hands. You shelter behind banks. You avoid unnecessary exposure. The body does not care about dramatic silhouettes. This is an important correction to popular ideas about indigenous endurance. Comanche people did not survive winter because they somehow felt cold less intensely. They survived through knowledge, preparation, materials, cooperation, and adaptation. Physical acclimatization may help people tolerate familiar climates, but biology still sets limits. Severe exposure remains dangerous. You cannot negotiate with heat loss. You can only slow it. The buffalo robe does exactly that. You feel warmth collecting around your thighs and abdomen. Your breathing becomes slower as muscles stop tightening against the cold. The fire seems less urgently necessary. That is useful because fuel must last. You allow the flames to shrink until glowing coals become more prominent. Heat continues radiating towards the shelter without consuming wood too quickly. A branch settles with a dull crack. Tiny sparks rise. You watch them disappear among the cottonwood branches. Above them, stars remain brilliant. The clear sky is beautiful but unforgiving because cloudless nights can allow surfaces to lose heat rapidly through radiation. You do not need scientific terminology to feel the result. Everything exposed is frosting over. Your saddle has a pale edge. Grass glitters. Even the horses carry faint crystals where moisture has settled along their coats. Yet beneath your robe, warmth persists. You think about the animal that once wore this insulation naturally. A buffalo could stand on wind-swept prairie with its heavy winter coat protecting the skin beneath. Now human skill has extended that protection to you. The transformation required hunting knowledge, processing knowledge, patient labor, and careful maintenance. Nothing about the robe is simple when viewed that way. It contains accumulated work. It also contains social knowledge. Someone had to teach someone else how to prepare the hide properly. Those skills pass through families and communities across generations. Historical survival is often described through famous individuals, but warmth is frequently inherited collectively. You settle deeper into the bedding. The grass beneath you gives softly. The buffalo robe folds around your body. The fire breathes orange against the darkness. For several minutes you simply listen. Wood clicks. A horse exhales. Wind moves over the bank. The creek whispers beneath ice. Your body finally feels protected enough to rest, though sleep is still some distance away. You look down at the heavy covering around you. Tomorrow it will be rolled, carried, perhaps exposed again to wind and dust. Tonight it becomes your closest defense against the cold. Still, a robe works best when the person beneath it is dressed wisely. Your attention shifts toward your leggings, footwear, outer layers, and the small openings where winter air can still reach skin. The buffalo has given you one answer. Your clothing must provide the next. You remain wrapped in the buffalo robe while the fire settles into a quiet bed of coals. Warmth now surrounds your legs, yet your shoulders and arms still notice every wandering current of air. The difference reminds you that winter clothing works much like the camp itself. No single garment solves everything. Protection comes from overlapping materials, careful fit, dry layers, and constant small adjustments as movement, weather, and temperature change. You loosen the robe briefly. Cold air immediately enters around your waist. That is enough encouragement. You pull your outer garment closer and check the opening near your neck. Even a narrow gap can allow warm air to escape whenever you move. Your hands follow the seams instinctively. The clothing around you is made for work rather than display. Hide garments can remain durable through riding, walking, hunting, and repeated exposure to rough vegetation. They also block wind reasonably well. Comanche clothing changed significantly across generations as trade expanded and new materials became available. Cloth, blankets, metal objects, and manufactured goods increasingly entered everyday life through complex exchange networks. Older materials never simply vanished overnight. Different garments existed beside one another. A warrior might combine hide clothing with traded cloth or blankets depending upon period, wealth, availability, and personal preference. Tonight, you depend heavily upon animal materials. Your leggings protect the lower body from wind and brush. Above them, additional layers help preserve warmth around the torso. Your outer covering overlaps those layers. Nothing is excessively tight. That matters because compressed insulation traps less air, while tight clothing can also restrict circulation to hands and feet. Winter punishes poor circulation. You flex your fingers again. They feel considerably better than earlier. The fire has restored warmth, and your sleeves protect your wrists where exposed skin had previously become uncomfortable. You check the closures. A cold draft near the wrist seems trivial during daylight. At midnight, repeated heat loss through that same opening becomes surprisingly irritating. You secure it. The improvement is immediate. You begin understanding winter clothing as a collection of boundaries. Neck, wrists, waist, ankles, and head are places where warm air can escape or cold air can enter. Protecting those transitions matters. The principle is straightforward. Although historical garments did not resemble modern technical winter equipment, people worked with materials available through hunting, production, trade, and exchange. Hide was one of the most important. Properly prepared animal skin can provide durability, flexibility, and some resistance against wind. Fur or hair adds much stronger insulation by trapping air. You feel this difference directly. The buffalo robe around your legs is much warmer than a thin hide layer alone. The clothing beneath it provides structure and mobility. Together, they work better. Your companions are making similar adjustments. One man lifts his outer covering around his shoulders while another checks the wrapping near his lower legs. Nobody announces a grand strategy. The movements are routine. That routine is the strategy. The Comanche became famous among outsiders for mounted warfare and hunting, which can overshadow ordinary skills required before anyone could ride effectively through winter. Clothing had to permit movement. A rider needed to mount quickly, control a horse, handle equipment, and travel long distances without becoming trapped inside cumbersome layers. Too little protection was dangerous. Too much bulk could interfere with mobility. You therefore dress for a moving body. During active riding, muscular work produces additional heat. When you stop, That heat production falls quickly. The clothing that felt adequate in motion can suddenly feel thin. You experienced exactly that after dismounting. This explains why a buffalo robe becomes particularly useful during camp. It adds substantial insulation when mobility is no longer the priority. You do not need to gallop anywhere while wrapped inside it. At least, you hope not. The thought carries a faint, sleepy humor. If you suddenly need to sprint through frozen brush while tangled in bedding. The evening has developed problems larger than temperature. For now, everything remains quiet. The wind moves above you. The horses occasionally shift. A thin ribbon of smoke passes between bare branches. You smell it in your hair. One quirky feature of historical winter clothing is the frequent usefulness of materials that modern people might consider humble. Fur scraps, soft hide, grass, and additional wrapping could improve protection where needed. Improvisation mattered more than perfect uniformity. A traveller could respond to conditions with whatever was available. You examine your upper body. The cold reaches your neck more strongly than anywhere else. You adjust material around it without covering your breathing. The relief is noticeable. Your ears also demand attention. Exposed ears lose heat quickly because they contain little insulating tissue. A head covering that protects them can make the entire body feel more comfortable. You pull yours into a better position. The world becomes slightly quieter. Wind noise softens around your ears, and warmth begins accumulating near your scalp. You notice how quickly comfort improves. People sometimes repeat the claim that most body heat escapes through the head. That statement is too simplistic. Heat escapes from exposed surfaces generally. The head can lose substantial warmth when uncovered simply because other body areas are already protected. Cover the head, and you reduce another route of heat loss. Comanche winter travelers did not require laboratory measurements to understand that exposed skin becomes cold. Experience provides convincing evidence. You feel it every time you uncover your hand. Historical descriptions of Comanche dress can be detailed in some periods and frustratingly vague in others. Outsiders often focused upon garments they considered visually distinctive. That introduces uncertainty. Researchers still disagree about how common particular cold weather combinations were among different Comanche divisions at specific dates. Fashion changed. Trade changed. Resources changed. Individual choices changed as well. You should not imagine every warrior wearing an identical winter costume. Historical people possessed personal preferences just as people do now. One person tolerated bulk better. Another favoured a particular wrapping method. Someone possessed a fine winter robe. Someone else made do with worn equipment. The basic challenge remained shared. Keep enough warmth while preserving useful movement. You rise from the bedding to test your clothing. The buffalo robe falls away, and cold immediately surrounds your legs. You take several steps near the fire. Nothing binds your knees. Your leggings move easily. Your upper layers remain secure while your arms retain full range. This balance matters on horseback. A rider who cannot move comfortably will tire faster and handle unexpected situations poorly. You roll your shoulders. Warmth remains inside the clothing. Good. You walk toward the horses, outside the immediate firelight. The temperature feels harsher. Frost crunches beneath your feet. The air smells cleaner here. Smoke fades, replaced by cold vegetation and the warm animal scent of the herd. You place a hand against one horse. Its coat feels thick. Beneath the surface, body warmth is unmistakable. The horse turns its head toward you and breathes softly. Moist air brushes your sleeve before becoming vapor. You check a strap. Cold leather has stiffened slightly. Your fingers remain capable because they are warm enough to work. That is important. Clothing must preserve function, not merely comfort. If your hands become too numb to manage tack, start a fire, or handle equipment, the problem has moved beyond inconvenience. You finish the check quickly. Then you return toward the sheltered camp. The fire's warmth reaches your face before you sit. You wrap the buffalo robe around your legs again. Comfort returns almost embarrassingly fast. The contrast reveals another winter lesson. You do not need every layer at maximum thickness all the time. Instead, You adjust insulation according to activity. During hard movement, overheating can cause perspiration. Once you stop, damp clothing cools rapidly. Avoiding unnecessary sweat therefore becomes part of staying warm. This is especially important in freezing conditions. You remember the work of gathering brush earlier. Moving briskly warmed your body, but you avoided exhausting yourself. That restraint now pays off because the layers against your skin remain comparatively dry. Dry clothing traps air effectively. Wet clothing conducts heat away more readily. Moisture can also freeze in outer layers. You would rather avoid that little experiment. The fire cracks as another branch settles. You lean forward and reposition the wood. A wave of heat touches your face. Your cheeks feel almost hot for several seconds, while your back remains cooler. You rotate slightly. The old campfire dance continues. Your companions settle into similar positions, each wrapped differently according to available coverings. The scene is not uniform. It is practical. That distinction matters when imagining historical life. Real camps contain repaired garments, mismatched materials, personal habits, traded objects, inherited possessions, and improvised solutions. History is untidy. Winter makes it even more so. You glance down at the clothing covering your knees. Dust from earlier travel remains along one edge. A small stain marks another area. Nothing looks ceremonial. These are working materials in a working landscape. You listen as the wind strengthens briefly. The hide windbreak shifts but remains secure. Cold air touches your face, yet your body stays comfortable beneath its layers. The system works. Shelter reduces wind. Clothing protects you while moving. The robe adds insulation while resting. The fire provides controlled external heat. Each defense overlaps the others. That redundancy matters because conditions rarely remain stable throughout an entire winter night. A fire can weaken, wind can change direction, bedding can shift. Your clothing stays with you through all of it. You pull the robe higher around your waist. Your feet, however, feel slightly cooler than before. You flex your toes. They move, but not as warmly as you would like. Perhaps moisture from the day's riding remains inside your footwear. Perhaps circulation has slowed while you sit. Either way, you cannot ignore them. Warm clothing around your torso will not help much if your feet spend hours becoming colder. You look toward the fire and begin loosening the covering near one ankle. The next small problem of the night has announced itself. You loosen the covering around your ankle and immediately feel a thin ribbon of cold air reach inside. Your toes still move easily, which is reassuring. But the footwear feels slightly damp after the long ride. That moisture may have come from perspiration rather than snow. The source hardly matters now. During a freezing night, anything damp near your feet deserves attention before several quiet hours turn a minor discomfort into something harder to correct. You shift closer to the fire. The buffalo robe remains wrapped around your other leg while you carefully remove the first piece of footwear. Cold air reaches the newly exposed layers. Your foot feels chilly immediately. You resist rushing. Everything must remain organized because losing a small item among grass and darkness would be remarkably easy. The fire provides enough light. Orange reflections move across the worn material in your hands. It smells faintly of hide, earth, and the accumulated dust of travel. Your inner covering feels damp, not soaked, just damp enough to matter. You flex your toes while inspecting them. Movement restores some warmth through circulation. You rub the foot gently, then keep it near the fire without placing it dangerously close. The goal is gradual warming. Numb skin cannot reliably judge heat. You have already learned that lesson with your fingers. Your companions continue their quiet tasks nearby. Nobody finds your footwear maintenance interesting, which is probably evidence of good sense. History rarely celebrates dry socks. Yet armies, hunters, travelers, and entire expeditions have suffered because feet were neglected. A person who cannot walk comfortably becomes dependent upon others very quickly. For mounted Comanche travelers, healthy feet still mattered. You must walk around camp. You must handle horses. You may need to travel on foot if a horse becomes injured or lost. Footwear is therefore survival equipment. Traditional Comanche moccasins and leggings were made from prepared animal hides. With forms changing through time and circumstance, hide footwear could be flexible, relatively light, and well suited to riding. It was not magically waterproof. Repeated contact with snow, wet vegetation, creek water, or perspiration could introduce moisture. That creates a winter challenge. Modern waterproof boots can trap sweat too, so the problem has hardly disappeared. Human feet remain enthusiastic producers of inconvenient moisture. You hold the damp inner material near warmth. Steam does not pour from it dramatically. Instead, it warms slowly. You turn it frequently. The fire should dry without scorching. Prepared hide can become damaged or stiff when exposed carelessly to excessive heat. You therefore keep everything at a sensible distance. Patience again becomes useful. The fire crackles. A small coal collapses inward with a soft hiss. Smoke drifts upward. You smell warming leather more strongly now, so you move the footwear slightly farther away. That smell is your warning. The process cannot be hurried. One quirky technique known across many cold weather cultures involves using dry plant fibers as additional footwear insulation. Grass can trap air around the foot while also helping manage moisture. The exact Comanche use is difficult to document uniformly. Still, dry grass was an obvious and available insulating material across many environments, and related practices appear widely among indigenous peoples. You glance toward the bedding. The dry vegetation gathered earlier has already proven useful beneath your body. A smaller amount may help here. You collect several clean, dry strands from beneath protected brush rather than stealing damp material from exposed ground. The grass feels brittle. It makes a faint whispering sound between your fingers. You place it near the fire for a moment, ensuring it remains dry. There is no complicated technology involved. That simplicity can be deceptive. The ability to recognize which local materials can safely supplement clothing represents accumulated environmental knowledge. You need the right material. You need it dry. You need enough without packing footwear so tightly that circulation suffers. More insulation is not always better. If your foot becomes compressed, blood flow decreases. Then your elaborate attempt at warmth defeats itself. You test the fit carefully. The foot should remain protected while still allowing movement. Your toes need room. This is another reason flexible footwear can be useful. It permits adjustments according to conditions and available insulation. Researchers remain cautious when reconstructing detailed Comanche winter footwear practices because historical observers recorded uneven information. Some descriptions come from periods when trade materials had already transformed clothing considerably. Others describe ceremonial appearance more carefully than everyday winter maintenance. The absence of a written description does not mean a practice never occurred. It simply limits certainty. You therefore imagine what the evidence supports broadly, without turning every plausible technique into a fixed rule. Comanche bands occupied different parts of a vast territory. Conditions varied. Resources varied. Individual experience varied too. The important historical reality is that winter foot care required active management. You cannot simply put on footwear at sunrise and forget about it until tomorrow. You check the first foot again. Warmth has returned. The skin feels comfortable rather than numb. You replace the dry inner material, add a modest insulating layer, then carefully put the footwear back on. The improvement is immediate. Your toes feel surrounded by dry warmth. You wiggle them. Plenty of room remains. Good. You wrap the ankle securely enough to prevent loose gaps where snow or wind could enter. Then you repeat the process with the other foot. This one is slightly drier. You still inspect it. Preventive work is easier than repairing a problem later. You rub warmth into your toes and allow the inner covering to dry briefly. The buffalo robe rests across your lap while you work. Its heavy fibers trap warmth around your thighs. Without it, sitting still during this process would become much less pleasant. You notice how every piece of camp equipment supports another. The fire dries footwear. The shelter protects the fire. The robe warms you while your foot is exposed. The bedding keeps your body away from frozen earth. Nothing works alone. Outside the shelter, the wind rises again. Branches click overhead. Several grains of old snow fall from the bank and land near the fire, where they vanish almost instantly. You hear the faint hiss. The sound is tiny but distinct. Your second foot is now ready. You replace the footwear and secure it. Both feet feel better. You stand carefully. Body weight changes the fit, so you take several steps around the sheltered area. Your toes still move. No pressure point appears. The dry grass remains comfortable. You walk farther toward the creek. The cold ground feels less intrusive than before. That is encouraging. Your horse watches you approach, ears turning toward the sound of your steps. You stop beside it. The animal shifts slightly, and one hoof scrapes against frozen earth. That noise reminds you of another winter concern. Horses also need sound footing. Ice near waterways can become treacherous, particularly in darkness. A horse slipping badly could create serious trouble for an entire travelling party. You inspect the nearby ground. The protected area where the animals stand is mostly dry and firm. They have access to vegetation without needing to crowd the icy creek edge. That was another benefit of choosing this campsite carefully. You return to the fire. Your feet remain warm. Success can be wonderfully boring. No emergency occurs. No dramatic rescue becomes necessary. You noticed dampness, corrected it, and prevented the problem from becoming larger. That is what experienced winter survival often looks like. The best crisis is the one that never develops. You settle into the bedding again. Dry grass compresses beneath you. The buffalo robe closes around your lower body, trapping the warmth your feet now help preserve. For several minutes, you simply enjoy the absence of discomfort. The fire gives a low, steady glow. One companion adds a branch. Another checks equipment. The horses chew softly in darkness. Your sense of smell has adjusted to smoke, but whenever the wind changes, you notice the rich scent again. It mixes with dry grass and hide. Your fingertips brush the edge of the robe. Everything feels dry. That word has become almost luxurious. Dry bedding, dry clothing, dry fuel, dry footwear. Winter turns dryness into wealth. A sudden gust pushes colder air through the shelter opening. Your face feels it, but your feet remain protected. You tuck the robe more closely around your ankles. The draft passes. Comfort returns. You begin thinking about tomorrow's travel. Footwear dried tonight will perform better when you climb onto the horse before sunrise. Damp material left unattended might freeze stiff by morning. That could make dressing difficult. It could also create abrasive surfaces against skin. Again, prevention saves effort. Historical travellers lived within these cycles constantly. Night preparation affected morning mobility. Morning choices affected evening comfort. A poorly maintained object could become tomorrow's weakness. You cannot separate survival into isolated moments. Everything continues. The fire has consumed another piece of wood. You glance at the remaining stack. There are still enough for several hours if used carefully. Your feet no longer demand attention, which allows you to notice another sensation. Thirst. Cold often hides it. You have not been sweating heavily, and the air makes you feel less thirsty than summer heat would. Yet your body continues losing water through breathing and ordinary activity. Each white cloud leaving your mouth contains moisture. You watch one now. It appears above the buffalo robe, glows faintly orange, then disappears into darkness. The creek lies only a short distance away. You can hear water moving beneath sections of ice. Having water nearby was one reason this bend seemed attractive. But winter water is never quite as convenient as it sounds. For tonight, food and drink will soon need attention. Your feet are warm enough to carry you there. Before you deal with your own thirst, one of the horses shifts sharply near the brush. Its hoof strikes frozen earth with a dull knock, followed by the familiar creak of leather. You turn toward the sound and watch its dark outline move beyond the firelight. The animal settles almost immediately, yet the interruption redirects your attention. Food and water can wait another few minutes. The horses cannot simply become part of the background because darkness has arrived. You rise from the bedding. The buffalo robe falls away from your shoulders, and cold air immediately finds the warmth stored beneath it. You tighten your outer clothing before walking toward the animals. Your feet remain comfortably dry. That small success makes the short journey easier. Beyond the fire, your eyes slowly adjust to darkness. Starlight gives the creek bank a faint silver outline, while frost makes patches of grass shimmer. The horses stand below the windward bank. Their bodies are turned naturally toward positions that reduce exposure. One lowers its head towards sparse vegetation. Another watches you approach. You hear steady breathing. Warm vapour appears around their nostrils and vanishes into the freezing air. You place a hand against the nearest animal's shoulder. The coat feels cold at its outer tips but noticeably warmer beneath. Like your buffalo robe, the horse's winter hair traps air close to the skin. Nature has provided its own layering system. The animal does not need your robe. It does need your judgment. Horses became central to Comanche power during the 18th century, transforming travel, hunting, warfare, trade, and the geographical reach of their communities. Few societies became more closely associated with mounted life. That relationship required enormous practical knowledge. Riding skill receives most of the attention today. But keeping horses alive and useful involved daily work. Animals needed grass, water, rest, protection, and monitoring. Winter complicated every requirement. Grass might be buried beneath snow. Water could freeze. Cold increased energy demands. Long journeys could exhaust an animal already working to maintain body temperature. You run your hand along the horse's side. Its condition feels satisfactory. The day's travel has been demanding but not extreme. You deliberately avoided pushing the animals unnecessarily as evening approached. A tired horse produces tomorrow's problems. You check the legs. Nothing feels unusual. The ground beneath them is firm rather than icy. Another advantage of the campsite selected before darkness. You listen as one animal tears at dry grass. The sound is surprisingly loud. Chewing follows in a slow rhythm. Horses can spend many hours feeding because their digestive systems evolved around frequent intake of fibrous vegetation. During cold weather, that feeding becomes especially valuable. Digesting forage generates heat. In a sense, the horse carries a small biological furnace. You cannot simply park it beside the fire and consider the matter solved. The animal needs fuel too. A companion has already checked the nearby grazing. The protected creek bottom contains enough dry vegetation for the short stay. Though nobody would choose this location for a large herd, your party is small. That makes the problem manageable. Large Comanche camps could maintain substantial numbers of horses, and access to grazing strongly influenced movement. A campsite suitable for people but poor for animals might become useless very quickly. Mounted societies had to think in two scales. There was the human camp. Then there was the horse landscape surrounding it. You look beyond the creek. The open prairie contains more grass. But allowing animals to wander freely there during darkness would introduce risk. They might drift. They might be stolen. They might encounter difficult terrain. A valuable horse disappearing overnight could transform a routine journey into a serious crisis. Comanche warriors therefore had strong reasons to remain attentive. Historical accounts frequently emphasize horse raiding because horses represented wealth, mobility, military advantage, and social importance. Capturing animals from rivals could be a major objective of raids. Naturally, that means your own animals require protection. The irony is obvious. A society famous for taking horses also became exceptionally skilled at preventing other people from taking theirs. You inspect the tethering arrangement. It allows movement without giving the horse enough freedom to become tangled among brush. The animal shifts again. Its ears turn toward the prairie. You pause. Everyone nearby becomes still for several seconds. The fire cracks behind you. Wind moves across the grass above the bank. Nothing else follows. The horse relaxes. Animals notice sounds humans miss, which makes their behavior useful around a nighttime camp. A sudden change in posture or attention can warn you that something is approaching. It might be another person. It might be an animal. It might simply be wind moving through unfamiliar brush. Not every alert means danger. Experience teaches you not to panic whenever ears rise. You wait. The prairie remains quiet. You continue the inspection. A curious detail from accounts of mounted plains life concerns how closely experienced riders understood individual horses. Temperament, endurance, speed, grazing habits, and reactions could differ considerably. A horse was not interchangeable machinery. One animal might remain calm during difficult weather. Another could become restless. A skilled rider learned those differences. You know which horse is likely to test its restraint. You know which one startles easily. You know which animal conserves energy during long travel. That familiarity becomes useful tonight. The most restless horse stands closer to the others, where their presence seems to calm it. The quieter animal occupies the outer position. This arrangement requires no grand theory. It comes from observation. Scholars still debate the exact scale and management patterns of Comanche horse herds during different periods. Estimates from historical observers can be inconsistent, exaggerated, or based upon limited encounters. Numbers also varied greatly between households and bands. What remains certain is the extraordinary importance of horses. Comanche economic and political power became inseparable from them. Their mobility astonished many outsiders. But mobility begins with feeding an animal in darkness while your dinner waits. You almost smile at that thought. History's grandest systems rest upon ordinary chores. The horse beside you exhales warmly against your hand. Its breath smells of dry grass. You move toward the next animal. A thin crust of frost has formed along part of its mane. You brush it lightly and check beneath. The coat remains dry. That is good. Wet hair loses insulating effectiveness just as damp clothing does. The animals have avoided the creek's icy margins, and no precipitation has fallen since you stopped. You inspect another horse. Its body feels warm beneath the coat. You can sense muscular strength even while it stands quietly. Tomorrow, that strength will carry you across miles of winter prairie. Tonight, you protect it. A stronger gust reaches into the creek bottom. The horses turn slightly. You feel the cold air penetrate around your neck. The windbreak does not protect this part of the animal area as completely as your sleeping shelter. You consider moving them. Then you examine the bank again. The gust fades quickly. Relocating animals in darkness could create more disturbance than benefit, especially when their present position remains reasonably protected. You leave them where they are. Winter judgment includes knowing when not to interfere. You crouch and inspect the ground. Dry grasses remain available. Snow cover is thin. The animals can paw lightly if needed to reach vegetation beneath frost. Plains horses historically endured environmental conditions that would surprise people accustomed to modern stables. Yet endurance should not be confused with invulnerability. Severe storms could kill livestock. Deep snow could prevent grazing. Ice crust could make forage inaccessible. Extended cold could weaken already thin animals. Comanche communities therefore had to respond to seasonal conditions through movement, herd management, and knowledge of favourable areas. Tonight's weather is harsh but manageable. That distinction matters. You stand again. Your hands have cooled during the inspection, so you tuck them briefly against your body. Warmth returns slowly. One horse begins chewing again. The others follow. The rhythmic sound is soothing. For a moment, you remain among them rather than returning immediately to the fire. Their bodies create a subtle sense of shelter. You smell warm hair, grass, leather, and frozen earth. The wind sounds farther away here. Some accounts and popular stories suggest riders sometimes benefited from the warmth of horses during severe conditions. That is certainly physically plausible, and people across many cultures have sheltered near animals. Yet specific stories can become exaggerated. A horse is not a portable heated bedroom. It moves, it steps, it produces moisture. It also weighs considerably more than you do, which makes careless closeness during sleep rather unwise. You appreciate the warmth without becoming imaginative. The fire remains your safer companion. You check the restraints once more. Everything is secure. Then you look beyond the bank. The sky is brilliantly clear. Stars stretch toward every horizon, and the open prairie appears as a dark, nearly featureless plain beneath them. Somewhere far away, other horses may be moving. Other travellers may be making their own camps. Buffalo herds may stand with their backs toward the same wind. Your little group occupies only a tiny pocket within an immense winter landscape. The thought feels calming rather than lonely. You return toward the fire. Its glow becomes visible first, then the shapes of your companions and bedding. Warmth reaches you several steps later. You sit down gratefully. The buffalo robe closes around your legs again. Your hands extend toward the coals. They tingle as heat returns. Behind you, the horses continue feeding. Their quiet chewing joins the creak, the wind, and the fire as part of the night's rhythm. You can rest more easily knowing they are settled. Still, the animals will need check-in again. Someone will remain attentive while others sleep. For now, however, another need has become impossible to ignore. Your stomach feels hollow. The day's riding has consumed energy, and cold weather increases the body's demand for fuel. You glance toward the food carried into camp. The fire is ready. The horses are secure. Now it is finally your turn to eat. You settle beside the low fire again, letting the buffalo robe close around your legs while your attention turns toward food. The hollow feeling in your stomach has become more noticeable since you stopped moving. During the day's ride, concentration and steady activity pushed hunger into the background. Now the camp is protected, your feet are dry, and the horses are settled. Your body finally has enough quiet to remind you that staying warm requires energy from somewhere. You reach toward the provisions. Traveling food must survive movement. Anything fragile, excessively bulky, or quick to spoil becomes inconvenient when carried across long distances on horseback. Meat therefore matters greatly for Comanche communities living within the buffalo country. Bison provided an extraordinary concentration of food and useful materials. Fresh meat could feed a camp after a successful hunt. Travel required different planning. Meat could be dried into lightweight strips that lasted much longer than fresh cuts. Dried food can then be carried and eaten with relatively little preparation. You take a portion. Its texture is firm and dry. The smell is mild compared with freshly cooked meat, carrying traces of smoke and animal fat. You chew slowly. Dry meat demands patience. There is something almost amusing about how long one small piece can occupy your jaw. Nobody designed trail food for luxurious dining. It exists because it works. Your body begins receiving protein and energy without requiring an elaborate meal. Yet during severe cold, fat becomes particularly valuable because it provides dense calories. Fat carries more energy per unit of weight than either protein or carbohydrate. You do not know those measurements. You know the effect. Fatty food leaves you feeling more deeply satisfied during difficult travel. Comanche buffalo hunting provided access to different kinds of fat depending upon season and animal condition. Certain fats were especially prized, and nothing about the carcass was treated as a uniform block of meat. Knowledge determined what was eaten immediately. Some portions could be dried, others could be cooked, still others could be processed or preserved for later use. You warm a small portion of food near the fire. The smell changes quickly. Rendered fat softens. Smoke carries the richer aroma through the shelter, and your stomach responds before the meal reaches your mouth. Warm food feels especially satisfying tonight. The heat itself does not remain in your body for hours, but the meal supplies energy that metabolism can use continuously. You eat without rushing, outside the shelter. The wind continues sweeping across the creek bank. It sounds stronger than earlier, though very little reaches your bedding. The fire flickers whenever a stray current enters. You add no extra wood yet. The coals are sufficient. Fuel and food share the same lesson. Use enough. Save enough. The Comanche world of the 18th and 19th centuries included extensive trade networks, so diets were never limited to one resource. Depending upon period and location, people could obtain agricultural foods, traded goods, wild plants, and products from neighboring communities. Still, buffalo remained central. The animals supported both subsistence and commerce. That importance increased the need to understand herd movements. A winter party travelling through country where buffalo were absent could not simply assume tomorrow's dinner would appear over the next ridge. Portable provisions mattered. You examine the remaining food. There is enough for tonight and the immediate journey ahead. That calculation is comforting. A curious plains food associated with many indigenous communities is a concentrated mixture made from dried meat and fat. Often known today through descriptions of pemmican, variations existed, and recipes differed considerably. Not every plains people prepared identical mixtures. Some versions included additional ingredients when available. The basic logic was excellent for travel because dried meat and fat could create compact, calorie-rich food with a relatively long storage life. Whether your imagined small party carries precisely that preparation depends upon time and circumstance. You do not need to force certainty. Historical foodways change constantly. Scholars still debate details of Comanche preservation methods in earlier periods because surviving sources often describe meals through outsiders' expectations. Traders and soldiers sometimes recorded what surprised them rather than what happened routinely. Archaeology provides another perspective. Oral histories add another. Together they reveal patterns, though not a complete menu for every winter night. Tonight, simplicity feels believable. You have dried meat. You have fat. You have enough fire to warm portions. That is plenty. Your companion passes another piece toward you. You take it and eat slowly. The food tastes stronger after warming. Smoke adds bitterness around the edges, while softened fat makes the meat easier to chew. You feel warmth spread through your stomach. Some of that sensation is immediate comfort. The longer benefit comes later as digestion and metabolism continue. Eating itself generates heat because processing food requires energy. Protein has a relatively strong thermic effect. Although your practical concern is simply staying fueled, cold weather can increase caloric demand substantially. Your body works continuously to maintain internal temperature. Shivering, when it occurs, consumes additional energy. You would rather avoid reaching that stage. The robe, clothing, shelter, and fire reduce how hard your body must work. Food supplies the energy for whatever work remains. Again, no single defense stands alone. You notice your shoulders relaxing. The meal helps. So does sitting still. So does knowing the horses are safe. Psychological tension consumes attention even when it doesn't consume firewood. The camp now feels settled enough for conversation. Voices remain low. Nobody needs to shout because the wind is largely above you. A few quiet words pass between companions about tomorrow's route and the weather. The northern sky remains clear. That could mean colder temperatures before dawn. You chew another mouthful. The prediction does not improve its flavour. A small piece of meat falls onto the robe. You retrieve it immediately. Food is too valuable to donate casually to bedding. The gesture would appear comically insignificant in a heroic historical painting. No painter chooses the moment when a warrior rescues dinner from his lap. Yet ordinary life is full of such moments. You smile faintly and continue eating. One horse snorts in the darkness. Another answers with movement through dry grass. Your ears recognize the sounds now. Nothing suggests alarm. The fire settles lower. Red coals glow beneath darkened wood. You place a thin branch across them, producing a small flame without wasting larger fuel. Its light reveals steam rising from a warmed container. Water will soon matter. For now, you take another bite. The texture makes you thirsty. That is useful because cold can suppress the sensation of thirst even while your body continues losing water. Dry winter air encourages moisture loss through breathing. Physical activity adds more. You may not feel sweaty, but dehydration can still develop gradually. Travelers must remember to drink. A person who becomes dehydrated may feel more tired and perform worse physically. Exactly when winter demands clear judgment. You look toward the creek. Water is close. Convenience, however, ends there. Some sections are covered with ice. Others remain open where current moves. Approaching the edge in darkness requires care, and drinking extremely cold water offers little comfort. You decide to warm what you can. Before moving, you finish the meal. There is no reason to leave food exposed. You secure the remaining provisions where animals and moisture are less likely to reach them. Storage matters, even in freezing temperatures. Careless handling can waste valuable supplies. You wipe your fingers. Fat feels slightly greasy against the skin, so you clean them thoroughly before pulling your hand covering back into place. Cold air finds wet skin quickly. You have learned to notice such details. The meal has changed your physical state more than expected. Your core feels comfortably warm. Your fingers respond easily. Your feet remain protected. You could almost imagine that the night has become mild. Then you stand. The buffalo robe falls away. Cold reminds you immediately that nothing outside has changed. You tighten your clothing. The fire continues glowing behind you as you walk toward the creek. Each step produces a soft crunch. The water's sound grows clearer. Thin ice lines the margins, reflecting faint starlight. You crouch at a safe distance and study the surface before approaching farther. The creek smells clean and mineral-rich. Cold air settles close above it. You can feel additional chill against your face. A section near the center continues moving beneath a fragile skin of forming ice. You listen. Water murmurs underneath. Somewhere downstream, ice gives a quiet pop. The sound echoes briefly between the banks. Your thirst suddenly feels stronger. You understand why this place was chosen before darkness. Without nearby water, the night would require another calculation. Snow could be melted when available, but melting enough snow consumes fuel and time because snow contains surprisingly little water by volume. Ice can also be melted. Neither option is free. Fuel becomes drinking water instead of warmth. A flowing creek gives you a better choice, provided you can access it safely. You return toward the fire to collect what you need. The smell of cooked meat still lingers inside the shelter. Your companions have nearly finished eating. The horses continue chewing beyond them. For a few minutes, the entire camp seems occupied with the same fundamental task. Every living body here requires fuel. Human bodies need food and water. Horses need forage and water. The fire needs wood. Remove any one of those supplies for long enough, and the journey begins to unravel. You crouch near the coals and prepare to deal with the water. Steam from the warmed container touches your face. It feels wonderfully soft compared with the dry winter air. You breathe in gently. Soon the simple act of drinking will complete another part of the night's preparation. But first you must persuade freezing water, fragile ice, limited fuel, and cold hands to cooperate. The creek waits quietly in the darkness. You carry a container toward the creek, stepping carefully where frost has hardened the ground. The fire behind you throws only a little light this far from the shelter, so starlight becomes your main guide. Water murmurs beneath thin ice near the bank, sounding strangely gentle compared with the wind overhead. You can smell wet earth now, mixed with the sharper mineral scent of cold water. After dried meat and hours of riding, the sound alone makes you noticeably thirstier. You approach slowly. The creek margin is the dangerous part. Thin ice can resemble solid ground in darkness, especially where snow or frost covers its edges. A careless step might soak your footwear. That would be deeply inconvenient. At temperatures this low, wet feet could become considerably more serious before morning. You test the ground first. Firm. Another step brings you beside an open section where current prevents complete freezing. The water is black beneath the night sky. You crouch carefully. Cold rises from the surface. Your exposed fingers begin aching within moments, so you work without wasting movement. The container dips into flowing water. A thin rim of ice breaks with a delicate cracking sound. You fill what you need and withdraw. Nothing dramatic happens. That is exactly how you prefer it. You carry the water back toward the fire while keeping your steps deliberate. The orange glow grows brighter with every yard. Warmth meets your face when you crouch again. You place the container where heat can reach it gradually. The water does not need to boil simply because the night is cold. Warming it enough to make drinking comfortable saves fuel. Firewood remains limited. Everything competes for the same energy. Historical Comanche camps were often established near waterways because reliable water mattered to both humans and horses. Rivers and creeks also provided timber, sheltered terrain, vegetation, and recognizable travel corridors. Water shaped movement across the plains. Yet winter changed familiar streams. Ice could restrict access, snow could hide banks. Freezing weather could turn shallow crossings into awkward obstacles. A campsite beside water therefore offered advantages without eliminating work. You watch the surface inside the container. Tiny movements appear as heat reaches it. Steam eventually begins rising. You extend your hands toward the warmth. The sensation feels luxurious. One companion passes you a small portion when the water becomes comfortable. You drink slowly rather than swallowing everything immediately. Warm liquid reaches your stomach. Your entire body seems to notice. The effect is partly psychological, but that does not make it unimportant. Warm drinks provide comfort, encourage hydration, and avoid the unpleasant shock of consuming nearly freezing water. Your shoulders loosen. You take another drink. The smoky scent of the camp clings faintly to the container, blending with the clean taste of water. Nothing could be simpler. Nothing feels better. Cold environments can disguise dehydration, because thirst may feel weaker than during hot weather. Your body nevertheless loses moisture through breathing, urine, and physical activity. The dry air contributes steadily. Every pale cloud leaving your mouth contains water that must eventually be replaced. You watch one now. It forms above the warm container and merges with steam before disappearing. A quirky misconception says eating snow is an easy solution whenever liquid water is unavailable. Snow certainly contains water, but swallowing large quantities of it forces the body to provide energy for melting and warming. It can also cool the mouth unpleasantly. Melting snow first is generally preferable when fuel and equipment allow. There is another inconvenience. Snow is mostly air. A surprisingly large volume may produce only a modest amount of liquid water after melting. You could fill a container with fluffy snow and end with much less water than expected. Winter likes inefficient bargains. Ice is denser and can yield more water for the same volume, but it still requires heat. Tonight, flowing creek water saves you that expense. You drink again. The container is passed along. Everyone takes enough without wasting it. The horses will also require water, though their needs can be handled separately and according to conditions around the creek. A horse consumes substantial quantities. Providing water for several animals would make melting snow over a tiny fire almost comical. Access to natural water therefore matters greatly. You hear one horse moving near the protected bank. Its hoof scrapes frozen soil. Tomorrow, the animals may drink before departure if the creek remains safely accessible. For now, nobody wants unnecessary movement around ice and darkness. You settle back into your buffalo robe. The warmth from the drink remains pleasantly noticeable. Your stomach feels full after the meal. Your feet remain dry. The fire is controlled. For a few minutes, the night seems almost comfortable. Then the wind changes. Smoke suddenly curls toward the shelter. You turn your head. The shift lasts only moments before airflow carries the smoke upward again. Still, you watch carefully. Weather rarely holds one position all night. The creek bank that protected you earlier could become less effective if wind direction changes substantially. Your shelter may need adjustment. So far, it remains adequate. The northern air continues moving mostly across the top of the bank. You hear it more than you feel it. Historians trying to reconstruct Comanche winter travel face similar changes in perspective. Surviving descriptions often come from observers who encountered communities under particular circumstances. One account might describe a large camp beside a river. Another might describe warriors traveling rapidly with minimal equipment. A third might record conditions during military pursuit. Researchers therefore hesitate to treat any single description as universal. Even water practices varied with season and location. Some regions offered reliable streams. Elsewhere, travelers might depend upon springs, pools, snow, or knowledge of scattered water sources. The Comanche homeland was vast. Environmental knowledge had to be equally broad. You imagine traveling through country without this creek. The fire would need to melt ice or snow. Fuel consumption would increase. Waiting time would increase. The horses would become a larger problem. Suddenly the modest watercourse beside you seems extraordinarily valuable. You listen to it again. The current makes a faint, continuous murmur beneath ice. That sound was part of the reason experienced travelers sought such places. Water announces life. Trees grow beside it. Animals visit it. Fuel gathers nearby. Terrain becomes more varied. Of course, other people know this too. A good campsite may attract strangers. That possibility never completely disappears. One companion glances toward the dark approach downstream. You follow his gaze. Nothing moves. The horses remain calm. You return your attention to the fire. The warm water is nearly finished. You drink the last portion allotted to you and feel satisfied. There is no reason to overfill your stomach immediately before lying down. You secure the container. Any remaining water must be handled carefully because it can freeze. A container left exposed overnight may greet morning with solid ice. That is not catastrophic. It is merely another problem requiring fuel and time. You position what needs protection nearer the sheltered area, without placing anything dangerously close to the fire. The organization of camp continues. Every item finds its place. You begin noticing how much winter survival depends upon preserving tomorrow's options. You keep fuel dry because you may need it before dawn. You dry footwear because morning travel requires flexible feet. You protect water because melting ice wastes time. You feed horses because tomorrow's distance depends upon their strength. Tonight and tomorrow are connected. The Comanche ability to move rapidly across plains country did not begin when riders mounted their horses. It began during nights like this. A traveller who maintained equipment, animals, hydration, and personal warmth could leave efficiently at first light. A careless traveller spent morning repairing mistakes. You rub your hands together. The fire has fallen lower. Red coals pulse beneath blackened wood, giving enough heat without large flames. You add one modest branch. It catches slowly. The light strengthens. Your shadow moves across the creek bank. Beyond it, frost continues spreading. You can see a pale crust forming along nearby vegetation. The clear sky remains crowded with stars. The temperature is probably still falling. You pull the buffalo robe higher around your shoulders. A full stomach and warm drink make sleep feel closer now. Your eyelids grow heavier. The day's riding has settled into your muscles. Yet you cannot simply lie down and disappear beneath the robe. The cold ground beneath you still demands respect. Earlier, you built insulation from dry grass and hides, but sleeping changes how those materials behave. Your weight compresses them. Your position creates gaps. Warm air escapes whenever bedding shifts. The next task is less dramatic than finding water and far quieter than building a fire. You need to arrange your body against the earth. You look down at the sleeping place. The dry grass is flattened slightly from repeated sitting. One edge of the hide has folded inward. A narrow patch near your shoulder feels thinner than before. You reach beneath it. Cold rises immediately against your fingertips. There is your reminder. The ground has been waiting patiently all evening. It does not need wind. It does not need snow. It only needs contact. You gather another handful of dry grass from the protected pile and begin thickening the bedding before fatigue convinces you that the existing layer is good enough. The warm water has restored you. Now that warmth must last, you lift the edge of the bedding and push another handful of dry grass beneath a thin place near your shoulder. The material rustles softly as it spreads across frozen ground. Your fingers can feel the cold rising through the lowest layer. Steady and almost deceptive because no wind is involved. Above you, moving air announces itself through branches and grass. The earth makes no sound at all. It simply waits beneath your body and accepts whatever warmth you allow to reach it. You add more insulation. The grass smells dusty and faintly sweet. Some stalks crack beneath your hand, while others bend and form a loose springy layer. You avoid packing them too tightly. Trapped air is useful. Compression is the enemy. You lower the hide again and press one palm against the surface. The cold feels less immediate now. That small improvement matters. When you lie down, much of your body will remain almost motionless for hours. Muscular activity will decrease, and the ground will continuously draw heat from areas pressed against it. A fire cannot fully solve that problem. Radiant heat warms exposed surfaces facing the flames. The earth remains beneath you, conducting heat away wherever insulation becomes thin. You therefore build downward protection. The basic physics would be recognizable to any modern winter camper. Although your materials are very different, Dry vegetation creates air spaces. Hides provide additional barriers. The buffalo robe above you traps another layer of warmth. Together, they form a simple sleeping system. Mainstream historical evidence from plains cultures shows extensive use of robes, hides, mats, vegetation, and portable bedding materials. Exact arrangements differed by community, season, available resources, and whether people occupied established camps or temporary stopping places. Your situation is deliberately modest. You're not inside a fully furnished family lodge. You are traveling. Everything must be portable or locally gathered. You stretch one leg across the bedding. The surface feels uneven. A small branch hidden beneath the grass presses against your calf. You find it and remove it. There is no reason to preserve discomfort for historical accuracy. The branch joins the fuel pile. One problem becomes another resource. You lie back carefully. Your shoulders settle first, then your hips. These areas compress insulation most strongly because they carry much of your weight. Almost immediately, you notice a colder patch beneath one hip. You sit up again. Another handful of grass goes underneath. The process feels tedious. That is precisely why it should happen before you become exhausted. Cold encourages laziness at the wrong moment. Your mind begins suggesting that something is probably good enough, because fixing it requires leaving the robe. Experienced judgment answers differently. Fix it now. You settle again. Better. Your back feels separated from the earth rather than attached to it. The fire remains several feet away. Positioned so radiant heat reaches the open side of your bedding. Its glow moves across the underside of the shelter. Smoke escapes cleanly. You can hear the wind above the bank. Down here, the air remains mostly calm. Your buffalo robe comes over your body. You pull one edge along your side and tuck another near your feet. The dense hair settles against your clothing. Warmth begins accumulating. Your first instinct is to curl tightly. That reduces exposed surface area and can feel warmer. But remaining in one cramped position for hours becomes uncomfortable. You experiment. A slight bend in the knees works well. Your arms rest close to your torso. Your head remains near the robe's opening, where breath can escape without dampening the interior excessively. You exhale. A cloud forms above your face. It catches the orange firelight and disappears. The robe stays dry. Good. One quirky feature of sleeping outdoors in severe cold is how quickly tiny gaps become noticeable. A narrow opening near the feet can behave like a private doorway built specifically for winter air. You find one now. Cold touches your ankle. You reach down and close the fold. The sensation disappears. You almost admire the efficiency of the wind. Give it half an inch, and it accepts the invitation. Your companions are arranging their own sleeping places nearby. Each person shifts, tests, adjusts, and shifts again. Nobody sleeps instantly. Bedding must fit the individual body. One person needs more material beneath a shoulder. Another rearranges a robe around his feet. The quiet movements sound domestic. Grass rustles, hide scrapes, wood clicks in the fire. The horses chew beyond the light for several minutes. Camp becomes a collection of small adjustments. There is scholarly uncertainty about the exact sleeping arrangements used by Comanche warriors on different kinds of expeditions. Outsider accounts sometimes describe remarkably austere conditions, but those descriptions can emphasize toughness while overlooking practical preparations. Researchers must interpret such claims cautiously. A traveler might indeed sleep with minimal bedding during mild weather or urgent movement. That does not mean minimalism was preferred during dangerous cold. Historical people generally valued comfort when comfort improved survival. There is no prize for unnecessary misery. You feel the truth of that beneath your shoulders. The additional grass is working. Your body heat slowly warms the immediate layers around you. The longer you remain still, the more noticeable that little pocket becomes. You are creating a microclimate. The phrase sounds grand. The reality is a tired person wrapped in buffalo hair beside a creek. Still, the principle is accurate. Your skin warms clothing. Clothing warms trapped air. The robe slows that air from mixing with colder surroundings. Bedding interrupts heat transfer toward the ground. Shelter reduces wind. The fire supplies additional radiant warmth. Every layer buys time. You listen to your breathing. It has become slower. Fatigue moves through your body now that essential tasks are mostly finished. Your thighs ache pleasantly from riding. Your shoulders feel heavy. The warm meal sits comfortably in your stomach. Sleep approaches. Then the fire pops sharply. Your eyes open. A small ember jumps onto bare ground and fades. Nothing requires action. You relax again. Nighttime sounds seem louder when you're lying down. The creek's faint movement beneath ice becomes clearer. Horse hooves sound heavier. Branches rubbing overhead resemble distant footsteps until you learn their rhythm. The mind remains watchful even while the body wants rest. That vigilance has value. A small travelling party cannot assume complete safety merely because the bedding feels warm. Someone will remain more alert. Watch responsibilities will rotate according to circumstances. For now, you allow your body to settle while another companion tends the coals. You turn slightly onto one side. Immediately, the pressure points change. The hip beneath you feels colder after several minutes because your weight compresses the grass and hide there. You shift again. This is normal. No bedding remains perfectly insulating under concentrated pressure. Changing position can restore circulation and allow compressed areas to recover slightly. You learn to move without opening the robe completely. That skill becomes surprisingly important. Every large adjustment releases warm air. You slide one knee carefully. The robe remains sealed around your feet. Success. You're becoming an expert in moving almost nowhere. The thought nearly makes you smile. Outside, the temperature continues falling without drama. Frost thickens along the exposed saddle. The brush has become pale at its tips. Your horse's breath appears whenever they lift their heads into faint firelight. The stars remain sharp. A clear winter sky can encourage strong radiational cooling after sunset, especially when winds ease near the surface. You do not need to measure it. You feel the gradual change around your face. The exposed skin near your nose is colder than 20 minutes earlier. Beneath the robe, however, your torso remains warm. You pull the upper edge slightly higher, not over your mouth, just enough to protect your neck and lower cheek. Your head covering does the rest. The fire shrinks. A companion adds a thick branch. Flames return slowly rather than suddenly. Their light moves across the shelter and gives the creek bank a soft amber glow. You close your eyes. The warmth is gentle. You begin understanding why the sleeping surface prepared before darkness mattered so much. Had you simply thrown a robe onto frozen earth, the night would feel very different. The ground would steadily steal heat from beneath you. You might respond by burning more wood. Then fuel would disappear faster. One poor decision would create another problem. Instead, dry grass does quiet work without consuming anything. This is perhaps the most elegant resource in camp. It requires no flame. No carrying space was sacrificed because you gathered it here. It produces no smoke. It merely holds still air beneath you. The humble material deserves more respect than it usually receives. You sink deeper into the bedding. The smell of grass is stronger near your face now, mixed with hide and wood smoke. Those scents are becoming associated with safety. Your breathing lengthens. For a moment, you drift towards sleep. Then one horse gives a low snort. Your eyes open again. The animal's ears are pointed toward the darkness beyond the creek. Another horse stops chewing. The companion nearest the fire lifts his head. Everyone listens. Wind moves through grass. A branch clicks. Farther away. Something indistinct disturbs the silence, then disappears. Perhaps an animal. Perhaps nothing important. The horses relax gradually. You do too. Still. The interruption reminds you that sleeping outdoors involves more than insulation. Warmth allows rest. Watchfulness allows everyone to keep that rest. Soon, someone must remain awake while others surrender more fully to sleep. And the quiet camp will divide itself between those dreaming beneath buffalo robes and those listening beyond the firelight. The horses return to their quiet feeding, and the tension around the fire dissolves almost as quickly as it appeared. You remain beneath the buffalo robe, listening while your companions settle again. Nothing dramatic crossed the darkness. Perhaps a small animal moved through brush. or perhaps shifting wind produced an unfamiliar sound. Either way, the interruption reminds everyone that sleep on the open plains is rarely complete isolation. You rest within a group, and the group's presence becomes another form of protection. Bodies settle closer to the sheltered area, not crowded, simply near enough that warmth, movement, and quiet voices remain shared. The fire occupies the open side of the sleeping arrangement, while the creek bank and improvised windbreak protect the others. Each person finds a position that does not interfere with another. Space matters, so does closeness. When several people sleep near one another, their combined body heat can slightly warm the immediate protected air. The effect is strongest inside enclosed shelters, but even here, reducing empty exposed space can help. You notice it subtly. The area beside your companions feels less severe than the outer edge near the brush. The fire contributes most of that difference. Still, human warmth belongs to the system, across Comanche social life. Cooperation was not an optional extra reserved for emergencies. Hunting, moving camp, caring for horses, processing hides, raising children, defending communities, and maintaining relationships all depended upon shared labor. A winter journey compresses that cooperation. Every person's actions affect everyone else. One traveler gathers wood, another watches horses, someone prepares food, someone notices a change in weather. Nobody needs to perform every task simultaneously. That saves energy. You shift beneath your robe and feel the dry grass compress gently under your shoulder. Warm air seems trapped around your torso. A companion sits nearby. His outline is visible against the coals. He speaks quietly. The words concern tomorrow's route rather than anything dramatic. A creek crossing may be easier several miles downstream. Another rider remembers the country differently. The disagreement remains calm. You listen while staring toward the fire. This is another kind of survival knowledge. Information belongs to the group. One person remembers water. Another remembers terrain. Someone else notices weather. Shared memory makes the landscape easier to navigate. Comanche bands were connected through kinship, political relationships, exchange, and flexible social organization. Leadership could depend greatly upon reputation, persuasion, skill, generosity, and circumstances. A traveling party, therefore, was not necessarily governed like a rigid military unit. Experience carried weight. Good judgment carried more. Tonight, nobody needs a formal command to pull a rope tighter when the wind changes. Practical knowledge speaks clearly enough. A gust moves over the bank. You hear grass flatten above you. The shelter covering trembles once, then becomes still. Your companion nearest the exposed side shifts his bedding several inches inward. The movement creates room for another person to adjust closer. Small changes happen naturally. You can almost feel the camp breathing. One person turns. Another adds fuel. A horse moves. The fire brightens and dims. The rhythm is irregular but peaceful. There is a quirky truth about groups sleeping in cold environments. The warmest location can become surprisingly desirable real estate. Nobody needs a written property law. Everyone knows where the fire reaches best and where the wind sneaks through. A position near the protected center offers obvious advantages. The outer places require better coverings or more frequent adjustments. Tonight, the arrangement reflects practical needs rather than prestige. The person keeping the closest watch remains positioned where rising is easiest. Those resting more deeply stay farther inside. You happen to occupy a reasonably comfortable middle place. History has finally granted you something. You do not celebrate too loudly. Your feet remain warm. The dried grass placed inside your footwear has maintained its insulating effect without feeling cramped. You flex your toes once. No numbness. Good. The person beside you adjusts his buffalo robe, briefly releasing a cloud of warmer air that you can almost feel against your hand. Then the edge closes again. Warmth is private and shared at once. Your own body heats your bedding, yet the group helps maintain everything around it. Someone tending the fire protects your warmth. Someone watching the horses protects tomorrow's mobility. Someone listening toward the prairie protects your sleep. That mutual dependence becomes especially obvious after dark. Researchers still debate many details concerning sleeping patterns within small Comanche war parties. Historical sources rarely provide minute-by-minute descriptions of ordinary nights. Some accounts emphasize extreme endurance. Others mention fires, robes, camps, and rest more casually. The truth likely varied according to danger, weather, mission, and available equipment. A party expecting pursuit might sleep lightly and separately. A group in secure country could rest more comfortably. Severe cold might encourage arrangements that conserved warmth, even when travelers normally preferred more space. Human behavior adapts. It rarely follows one permanent rule. You listen as the conversation near the fire fades. Silence gradually replaces it. One companion remains sitting upright. Another lies completely still. Someone coughs once into his covering. The sound disappears beneath the wind. Your eyelids become heavy again. The fire has entered a steady stage. Large flames are gone. Red coals glow beneath dark wood, occasionally producing small tongues of orange. This is enough. The coals release heat without consuming fuel rapidly. Their light is dim enough that the surrounding darkness feels close. You can see only part of the horses now. Their breathing continues. One animal chews slowly, pauses, then begins again. That sound becomes strangely soothing. You think about how different this night would feel alone. Every task would belong to you. You would gather all the wood. You would manage every horse. You would watch every direction. You would tend every coal. Sleep would become fragmented because nobody could take responsibility while you rested. Traveling companions therefore provide something beyond physical warmth. They provide time. One person can sleep because another remains awake. That exchange is enormously valuable. The human body needs rest, especially after long riding. Fatigue weakens judgment. Cold magnifies mistakes. A tired traveler may ignore damp footwear, misjudge weather, or become careless around animals. Sleep itself becomes part of survival. You pull the robe closer around your shoulder. The hide smells faintly smoky. Your face remains cool, but everything below your neck feels comfortable. You inhale slowly. Cold air enters your nose. Warm breath leaves as vapor. The contrast becomes rhythmic. In, out. The fire clicks softly. A companion reaches forward and moves one piece of wood without speaking. Sparks rise briefly. For an instant, orange points float against the stars. Then darkness swallows them. The plains beyond the creek remain invisible. You know they are there. Miles of grass stretch outward, crossed by waterways, animal trails, winter winds, and routes remembered through generations. Yet your world has narrowed again. Several sleeping bodies, a few horses, a small fire, a bank of frozen earth, enough dry grass to keep the ground away. The scale feels intimate. That intimacy has social meaning. Comanche communities valued kinship deeply, and traveling groups were often bound through family relationships, friendship, obligation, or shared purpose. People depended upon reputations built over time. A reliable companion mattered. Someone who neglected horses, wasted fuel, or ignored danger made everyone else's night harder. Someone who noticed problems early made life easier. You do not need written rules to understand the difference. Trust becomes visible through behavior. One companion earlier gathered extra dry wood without being asked. Another checked your horse while you handled water. You shared food. Now someone remains awake while your breathing slows. These small acts form the invisible structure of camp. The cold remains outside that structure. It presses against hides and clothing. It freezes water along the creek. It stiffens leather. It turns grass silver. But it cannot isolate you completely. You feel the presence of others nearby even with your eyes closed. Their breathing becomes part of the night. One person shifts beneath a robe. Another murmurs briefly before becoming quiet. The sound of sleeping humans is surprisingly reassuring when the landscape beyond them is enormous. You begin drifting. Your thoughts become less organized. The firelight behind your eyelids seems red and distant. Then you remember that the person currently awake cannot remain so forever. Watchfulness must move through the group. Rest must be shared just as labor was shared earlier. At some point, perhaps after the fire has burned lower and the stars have shifted across the sky, Someone will touch your shoulder. Your turn will come. You will leave the warm buffalo robe, sit beside the coals, listen to the horses, and stare into darkness while your companions sleep. That prospect does not feel pleasant. It feels necessary. For now, however, the watch belongs to someone else. You allow your muscles to loosen. The grass beneath you feels soft enough. Your feet remain dry. Your stomach is warm from food and water. The wind has become a distant rushing sound above the creek bank. Sleep arrives slowly. The final thing you hear clearly is a horse exhaling beyond the firelight. Then even that sound begins fading into the background. For a while, you surrender the night to another pair of eyes. A hand touches your shoulder sometime later. Gently enough that you wake without alarm. For several confused seconds, you remain perfectly still beneath the buffalo robe. The fire has become a dim red glow, and the creek bank is almost invisible. Then memory returns. You are beside the frozen watercourse. The horses are nearby, and the person who's been watching through the darkness is ready to sleep. Warmth makes a persuasive argument for staying exactly where you are. But responsibility has already arrived. You open the robe carefully. Cold enters immediately. The contrast feels almost rude. You sit upright and pull your outer clothing tightly around your shoulders before exposing anything more than necessary. Your companion murmurs quietly. Nothing unusual has happened. The horses remain settled. The wind has strengthened slightly. The fire needs attention. That is enough information. You rise. Your legs feel stiff after lying still, so you move them slowly before stepping beyond the bedding. Dry grass crunches beneath your feet. The insulation inside your footwear has remained warm. You are grateful for the work done earlier. The companion you replace slides beneath his own robe. Within moments, his movements stop. Now the night belongs partly to you. You crouch beside the fire. Only a few coals remain brightly visible beneath grey ash. You choose one dry branch from the protected stack and place it carefully across them. Nothing happens immediately. You wait. A thin line of smoke appears. Then one edge begins glowing. A small flame rises without disturbing the sleeping camp. That is enough. You do not need daylight. The purpose of a watch is broader than simply guarding against human enemies. Someone awake can monitor horses, weather, fire, equipment, and unexpected changes around camp. Cold itself deserves watching. A sleeping person may not notice a shifted robe or weakening fire immediately. A companion can recognize problems before they become serious. Shared vigilance protects rest. Historical accounts frequently describe Comanche warriors as extraordinarily alert travelers, especially when moving through contested country. Their mobility depended upon avoiding surprise as much as achieving speed. Nighttime security therefore mattered. Yet descriptions of exact watch systems vary considerably. Some observers recorded guards or rotating vigilance during particular expeditions. Others provide only general comments about caution. There was probably no single arrangement used everywhere. Circumstances decided. Tonight, your party is small enough that formal ceremony would be unnecessary. Someone stays awake. Later, someone else takes over. Simple. You sit with your back partly against the sheltered bank. The buffalo robe no longer surrounds you, but your clothing remains adequate while you're awake and occasionally moving. Your face feels the cold most strongly. You breathe into your hands briefly. Warm vapor touches your fingers. Then you listen. The first challenge of a night watch is discovering how many sounds exist after everyone else becomes quiet. The fire clicks. The creek murmurs. Cottonwood branches rub together overhead. A horse shifts its weight. Farther away, wind presses through thousands of dry grass stems. Each sound demands interpretation. You learn their patterns. The creek's noise is continuous. Branches respond to gusts. Horse movement is heavier and closer. Anything that does not fit these patterns attracts attention. You stare beyond the firelight. Darkness seems almost solid. Your eyes adjust gradually until shapes appear. Brush becomes recognizable. The bank acquires an edge. The nearest horse becomes a large shadow against slightly lighter ground. You avoid looking directly into the flame for long periods because bright light reduces your night vision. Instead, You keep the fire low. This also limits how far its glow travels. Concealment remains useful even though weather encouraged you to light it. The Comanche operated within a world of competing groups, shifting alliances, trade relationships, raids, and warfare. Camps could not assume that every approaching traveller was friendly. Horses were especially valuable targets. You glance toward them. All remain present. That is reassuring. A quirky aspect of nighttime watchfulness is how quickly imagination becomes enthusiastic. A shrub that looked completely harmless before sunset can become suspicious after midnight. You stare at one now. Its branches move slightly. For a moment, it resembles a crouching figure. Then wind passes. The mysterious intruder becomes vegetation again. You almost smile. The mind dislikes incomplete information. Darkness provides plenty. Experienced travelers learn to distinguish genuine warning signs from ordinary movement without becoming careless. The horses help. Their hearing and smell extend beyond yours. If several animals suddenly become attentive toward the same direction, you would take notice. At present, they are relaxed. One continues chewing. Another stands with its head lowered. No alarm. You turn your attention toward the sleepers. The buffalo robes form low shapes along the protected ground. Only occasional movement shows where one person ends and another covering begins. Breathing remains slow. The scene looks peaceful. Your job is to keep it that way. You check the fire. The new branch is caught properly. Its flame is modest. You shift it slightly to keep sparks away from bedding. A faint wave of warmth touches your hands. You hold them near the coals for several seconds. Then you stand. Movement restores warmth through your legs. You walk quietly toward the horses. Frost has become thicker. It glitters faintly under starlight and crunches under each step. Your breath hangs around your face. You check the nearest restraint. Secure? The horse turns its head toward you but shows no concern. You place your palm briefly against its neck. Warmth exists beneath the coat. You move to the next. Also secure. The animal's calm behavior reassures you more than the empty horizon. Researchers continue debating aspects of Comanche raiding and camp security because many surviving descriptions were written by military opponents or frightened frontier observers. Such sources often emphasize danger and warfare. They can distort everyday life. Comanche people spent far more time living ordinary social lives than appearing dramatically in someone else's conflict narrative. Still, vigilance during travel was practical. A small party away from a larger camp could not afford complacency. That remains true tonight. You return to the fire. Your fingers have cooled again. You warm them gradually. The night seems colder than when you first went to sleep. That is probably not imagination. As darkness continues, surfaces lose heat, and temperatures may keep dropping toward the hours around sunrise. Your remaining fuel becomes more valuable. You count the larger pieces without physically rearranging them. Enough remains. Not abundant. Enough. The distinction is comforting. You add nothing. The existing branch continues burning steadily. A larger fire would make you warmer now while leaving fewer options later. You choose patience. The wind suddenly strengthens. You hear it approaching before feeling anything. A broad rushing sound moves across the prairie and reaches the cottonwoods. Branches shake. The shelter covering pulls against its supports. You rise immediately. One weighted edge shifts slightly. You secure it before the gap widens. Cold air briefly enters the sleeping area. One companion moves beneath his robe but does not fully wake. The gust passes. The covering settles. You remain crouched beside it for several moments, testing the airflow with your hand. The shelter's intact. That tiny intervention illustrates why someone stays awake. Without it, the loose edge might have continued opening. Wind could then enter the bedding area for hours before exhausted sleepers responded. A simple adjustment preserves everyone's warmth. You return to your position. The fire is dimmed slightly. You resist adding fuel. Your body feels cooler, so you move instead. Several slow steps along the bank restore circulation without producing sweat. You roll your shoulders. Your clothing traps the generated warmth. The system from earlier still works. You stop near the creek. Moonless darkness hangs above the water. Thin ice has expanded across sections that were open before you slept. The current remains visible only in a narrow strip. You hear occasional cracking as ice responds to changing temperature and moving water. The sound is beautiful. It is also useful information. Morning access may require more care than evening access did. You remember that. Night watch includes collecting knowledge for dawn. The stars have shifted noticeably, without checking any instrument. You understand that hours have passed. People familiar with the night sky can estimate time through celestial movement. Although precision varies by season and knowledge, you need no exact minute. Your body already knows the watch has been long. Fatigue begins pressing behind your eyes. You blink more frequently. That is dangerous in its own quiet way. A person who intends to rest his eyes briefly may discover that several minutes disappeared. You stand again. Cold becomes your ally. You expose your face slightly and let the air sharpen your attention. Effective. Unpleasant but effective. You walk toward the horses once more. They remain quiet. The prairie remains empty. When you return, another companion is beginning to stir beneath his robe. Your relief is immediate. He sits slowly and pulls clothing around himself. The exchange happens with few words. Nothing unusual. Horses secure? Wind stronger. Shelter checked. Fire low. Ice spreading. He nods. That is enough. You surrender the watch. The buffalo robe waiting on your bedding feels unbelievably inviting. You lower yourself onto the dry grass and pull the heavy covering around your body. Warmth does not return instantly. Your clothing and skin must heat the trapped air again. You curl slightly. Within minutes, the difference becomes noticeable. Your feet warm first, then your legs. Your shoulders relax. Someone else now sits beside the coals. You hear a branch being adjusted. The horses remain calm. The wind continues moving above the bank. You close your eyes. Your brief time awake has shown you why a freezing camp cannot simply be built and forgotten. The night changes. Fire weakens. Wind shifts. Ice grows. Animals move. People grow tired. Survival continues while others sleep. Now those responsibilities belong to another watcher. You sink deeper into the buffalo robe and let your breathing slow. Above the shelter, the stronger wind keeps gathering. By the time your next sleep becomes deep, that wind may become the most important problem remaining before dawn. The wind reaches you before you're fully awake. It does not enter as one dramatic blast, but as a persistent cold pressure finding the upper edge of your buffalo robe, somewhere beyond your closed eyes. The cottonwoods are making more noise than before. Their bare branches knock and scrape together while dry grass hisses above the creek bank. You pull the robe higher around your shoulder, hoping the problem will disappear without requiring you to leave the warmth you have carefully rebuilt. It does not. Another gust crosses the prairie. The shelter covering trembles. Cold air slips briefly through a gap near your head, carrying the smell of frozen earth and distant grass. You open your eyes. The fire is still burning low, and the current watcher is already examining the exposed side of camp. He notices you stirring, but gestures that nothing urgent is wrong. That is reassuring. Still, the weather has changed. You sit halfway upright beneath the robe and listen. The wind now produces a deeper rushing sound above the bank. Gusts arrive more frequently, and each one pushes against the cottonwoods before continuing downstream. The campsite remains protected. Mostly. That final word matters. Wind is one of the most important enemies during freezing weather, because moving air accelerates heat loss from exposed surfaces. Your skin warms a thin layer of nearby air. When the air remains relatively still, it provides slight insulation. Wind continuously removes it. Your body must warm replacement air again and again. This is the principle behind wind chill. Although you need no numerical chart to understand it tonight, step into the open, and the difference becomes obvious. You reluctantly leave the bedding. The buffalo robe falls away. Your clothing suddenly seems much thinner. You tighten everything before standing. The watcher joins you near the windbreak. One edge of the covering has begun fluttering where its weight shifted earlier. You crouch. Cold air pushes through the opening. There is your problem. You reposition the saddle that had been helping secure the lower edge. Another piece of equipment provides additional weight. The gap closes. Immediately, airflow weakens. You hold your hand near the repaired section. Much better. The shelter has not become warmer by producing heat. It simply stops surrendering warmth so easily. That distinction has followed you all night. Comanche travelers understood wind through repeated exposure across an unusually open landscape. Much of the southern plains offers limited protection from strong winter systems. Northern cold fronts can sweep south rapidly. Temperatures may fall sharply. Winds can intensify. A comfortable afternoon can therefore become a dangerous night faster than an inexperienced traveler expects. The Comanche had generations of experience with these changes. That didn't make storms harmless. It made preparation possible. You move toward the top of the bank. The watcher remains below. You rise only far enough to feel the open wind. It hits your face immediately. The difference is startling. Loose parts of your clothing begin moving. Your eyes water slightly. The cold seems to sharpen several degrees, even though the actual air temperature may be nearly identical to that below the bank. You lower yourself again. The pressure disappears. This tiny slope is doing extraordinary work. You remember choosing it before darkness. At the time, the bank looked merely convenient. Now it feels almost architectural. Terrain has become a wall. A mainstream historical fact about plains camping is that river valleys, wooded creek bottoms, and sheltered terrain were frequently valuable winter locations. They offered combinations of water, fuel, grazing, and protection. Such places could also create problems: flooding, damp ground, insects during warmer seasons, and tactical vulnerability might make them less desirable under other circumstances. Tonight, wind protection dominates the calculation. Every campsite belongs to its weather. You return toward the bedding. Before lying down, you examine the upper windbreak again. The covering pulls gently against its supports, but remains secure. Brush bends without breaking. Good. A quirky old traveler's trick across many windy environments is simply making shelter lower rather than larger. People often imagine comfort as additional space. Wind disagrees. A low profile presents less surface for gusts to grab and reduces the volume of air your warmth must influence. Your temporary shelter already follows that logic. Nobody can stand comfortably inside it. That hardly matters while sleeping. You settle onto the bedding. The buffalo robe closes around you again. Warmth begins returning. The repaired gap has made an immediate difference. Only your face feels exposed. You turn slightly away from the opening. The fire brightens as the watcher adds a small piece of wood. Flames bend toward the creek for several seconds. Their direction reveals airflow better than any spoken explanation. You study them. The wind has shifted somewhat from earlier. Fortunately, the bank still blocks most of it. If the direction changed much farther, you might need to reposition part of the shelter. That would be unpleasant now. You hope the weather shows restraint. The weather does not care about your preference. Historians still argue about how frequently severe winter conditions disrupted Comanche movements, or forced traveling groups to remain in sheltered camps longer than planned. Sources record notable storms unevenly. While ordinary delays often disappeared from written history, environmental evidence helps fill some gaps. So do accounts from neighboring peoples and later observers. What seems certain is that mobility required knowing when not to move. A famous horse culture was still constrained by weather. Strong wind could exhaust animals. Blowing snow could hide landmarks. Ice could complicate water access. Extreme cold could make every routine task slower. Speed sometimes begins with waiting. You hear another gust approaching. It rolls across the prairie like distant surf. Grass bends, branches shake. The shelter tightens around its supports. This time, no gap opens. You remain warm. The success feels satisfying. Your companion near the fire stays seated but watches the covering until the gust passes. Then everything relaxes. The wind continues, though less violently. You think about the horses. Their position below the bank provides partial protection, but their larger bodies remain more exposed than yours. You sit up again. The watcher has already noticed. Together, you approach them. The animals stand with hindquarters angled toward the wind where it reaches the drainage. Their coats look pale with frost. You run a hand beneath the outer hair of your horse. The deeper layer remains dry and warm. The animal seems calm. No need to move it. Relocating horses now could disturb the entire camp and place them on worse ground. You leave them settled. One horse exhales near your shoulder. Warm breath touches your cheek. For one pleasant second, you receive free heating. Then the animal turns away. Apparently the service has ended. You return toward the fire. The small joke exists only in your mind, but it lightens the cold. Human beings have probably been quietly amused by inconvenient weather for as long as weather has been inconvenient. You sit beside the coals. Your hands extend toward them. Heat reaches your palms. The backs remain cooler. You rotate them slowly. Wind changes the fire's behavior. It can make flames burn faster by supplying oxygen. Yet strong gusts can also scatter sparks or consume fuel wastefully. The sheltered position helps control both problems. You do not build the fire higher. The remaining wood must last. The watcher shows you the stack. Several substantial pieces remain, enough for the final hours if managed carefully. The word enough again feels comforting. You return to your bedding. Sleep seems possible despite the noise. In fact, the steady rushing above the bank becomes strangely soothing once you trust the shelter. It resembles distant water. Your body begins separating harmless sounds from meaningful ones. Constant wind fades into background. A sudden change would wake you. The same adaptation happens with horses. Their normal shifting no longer demands attention. An abrupt snort might. Experience is partly the art of deciding what can be ignored. You close your eyes. The robe warms your shoulders. Your dry footwear holds heat around your toes. Grass beneath you prevents the frozen earth from becoming intrusive. The repaired windbreak remains firm. Everything you prepared earlier continues paying dividends. This is why winter endurance cannot be reduced to physical toughness. A person standing proudly on the open ridge would lose heat rapidly. A person lying behind a modest creek bank inside dry insulation spends much less energy achieving the same survival. Wisdom often looks less impressive. It also sleeps better. The wind rises again. You barely move. The covering shifts softly but holds. The fire gives a faint crack. Someone walks quietly toward the horses. You recognize the footsteps and remain relaxed. Then something new touches your face. Not wind. A tiny cold point melts near your eyebrow. You open your eyes. Another lands on the buffalo robe. Then another. You look toward the shelter opening. Fine particles are drifting through the firelight. At first, you wonder whether frost has shaken from the branches. Then the watcher looks upward. The stars are disappearing. Cloud has moved across part of the sky. A few small flakes begin descending into the creek bottom. The wind has brought company. You watch one flake land beside the coals and vanish with a hiss too quiet to hear. Another catches in the buffalo hair near your shoulder. Snow itself is manageable. Snow combined with strong wind can change the landscape quickly. You sit upright again, no longer quite as interested in sleep. The night has already taught you how to choose terrain, build shelter, manage fire, protect clothing, feed your body and watch the horses. Now the weather is preparing a different examination. Above the bank, the first thin veil of snow begins moving sideways through the darkness. The first snow does not fall gently for long. Within several minutes, the flakes begin moving almost sideways above the creek bank, driven by the wind that has been strengthening for hours. You watch them pass through the firelight as pale streaks rather than delicate crystals. Some disappear into darkness beyond the shelter. Others collect against brush, saddles, and exposed grass. The storm is still modest. Yet everyone in camp understands that winter weather can change character quickly. You pull the buffalo robe around your shoulders. The watcher remains near the fire. Another companion wakes and studies the sky without speaking. Stars that were brilliant earlier have vanished behind cloud. The darkness feels different now. It is softer above you, but less transparent. Snow absorbs and scatters what little light exists. The prairie beyond the creek becomes even harder to read. You listen. Wind dominates everything. Cottonwood branches scrape together overhead, while individual snowflakes produce almost no sound when they reach the ground. That silence is deceptive. A landscape can change beneath falling snow without announcing itself. Trails disappear, ice becomes hidden, hollows fill, familiar shapes lose their edges. For a mounted traveller, these changes matter enormously. You check the shelter covering. The windward side remains secure after the adjustments made earlier. Snow begins collecting along its lower edge, where the bank protects it from being blown away. That accumulation may actually help. A modest layer of snow can block tiny gaps and reduce airflow. You resist disturbing it. Snow is cold, obviously, yet it also contains enormous amounts of trapped air. When deep and stable enough, it can function as insulation. Animals exploit this property. Humans have done so across cold environments for thousands of years. Tonight, however, you're not building a snow shelter. There is nowhere near enough accumulation. You simply allow the drifting flakes to strengthen the lower edge of your windbreak. One companion brushes snow from the exposed fuel pile. Most wood remains beneath cover. That earlier decision now looks particularly wise. Wet fuel would produce smoke and frustration when you need reliable heat. You move the remaining dry pieces farther under protection. The fire stays low. Its flames lean with occasional drafts but recover quickly. Mainstream historical records make clear that Comanche communities experience severe plains winters, including snowstorms and sudden temperature changes. The southern plains were never uniformly warm. Weather could become deadly for people and livestock. Large camps had more resources than your little travelling party. Yet they also had more animals and people requiring protection. Winter could challenge entire communities. Mobility offered one response. If conditions allowed, people could seek better grazing, sheltered valleys, or areas with accessible fuel and water. But movement during an active storm created its own risks. You look toward the invisible prairie. Leaving this creek now would be foolish unless some greater danger forced you. Your campsite has water. It has wood. The bank provides shelter. The horses are calm. You already know the ground. Travel would exchange known protection for uncertain terrain. So you stay. Sometimes survival means doing less. The idea clashes with romantic stories about warriors pushing heroically through every storm. Real endurance often requires recognizing when determination becomes wasteful. You cannot intimidate a blizzard. You can wait behind a bank. The snow thickens slightly. Flakes now reach the horses. You walk toward them with another companion, keeping your face angled away from the wind. The protected creek bottom remains manageable. Above the bank, conditions sound much worse. Your horse lifts its head. Snow is collected along its mane and back. You brush some away and examine the coat underneath. Still dry, the animal's natural insulation remains effective. Its body feels warm beneath your palm. You check the footing. A thin white layer covers previously bare earth, but the surface beneath remains firm. No dangerous ice has formed here. Good. The animals turn their hindquarters toward the strongest airflow and lower their heads. Their behavior is calm rather than distressed. You leave them where they stand. Moving them repeatedly would consume energy without improving their position. One horse begins pawing lightly through the thin snow toward grass. Its hoof scrapes twice. Dry stems appear. The animal lowers its muzzle and feeds. That ordinary behavior reassures you. A quirky feature of snowstorms is how strongly they can affect sound. Fresh snow absorbs certain frequencies, making nearby landscapes seem unusually quiet once wind decreases. Tonight, the wind prevents that silence. Still, between gusts, you notice the change. The creek seems farther away. Footsteps sound softer. Even the horse's movements feel muffled. Then another gust arrives, and the world becomes noisy again. You return toward the fire. Snowflakes melt against your outer clothing where warmth reaches the surface. You brush them away before they soak into material. Moisture management becomes more important now. A few dry flakes are harmless. Repeated melting can gradually dampen clothing. You inspect your shoulders, mostly dry. You sit beneath the shelter and let the robe close around you again. The difference between exposed air and protected bedding is enormous. Warmth returns slowly. Your companions settle. Nobody appears particularly alarmed. That calm comes from conditions remaining within familiar limits. The storm has not yet become severe. Still, everyone watches. Historians have difficulty reconstructing the frequency and intensity of individual storms experienced by Comanche travelers before systematic weather records became widespread. Tree rings, environmental studies, military reports, travelers' journals, and regional climate reconstructions provide partial evidence. They reveal variability rather than one stable climate. Some winters were relatively mild. Others brought prolonged cold, heavy snow, or severe storms. Accounts of extraordinary weather may also exaggerate because unusual events were more likely to be recorded. Ordinary nights vanish more easily from history. You're living one of those ordinary difficult nights. No famous battle occurs. No treaty is signed. Snow simply falls while tired people protect their bedding. That is social history in its quietest form. You watch the accumulation near the fire. Flakes landing close to the coals disappear instantly. Those farther away remain. A pale crescent develops along the bank. The fire creates its own small climate. You move one piece of wood. Sparks rise and vanish into snow. The sight is beautiful. Orange points travel upward while white flakes descend. For a few seconds, the two movements cross in darkness. Then the sparks disappear. The snow continues. Your face feels cold, but the rest of your body remains comfortable. You think about what would happen if the storm intensified. The shelter could be strengthened. Additional brush might be added. The horses could be moved deeper into available protection. Fuel could be rationed more strictly. Travel could be delayed after sunrise. You have options. That is the real value of preparation. You do not need to improvise everything after conditions become dangerous. Earlier decisions created choices. The creek bank gives protection. The fuel pile gives time. Food gives energy. Dry clothing gives warmth. Healthy horses give mobility when the storm ends. Options are a form of safety. The wind shifts slightly. Smoke enters the shelter for several seconds. You lower your head. Your eyes sting. Then the smoke clears. One companion adjusts the opening by moving part of the covering. Ventilation improves. Nobody complains. The entire correction takes less than a minute. Again, camp survives through adjustments rather than perfection. You lie back. Snow taps faintly against the hide above you. The sound is softer than rain. Almost nothing. Your breathing becomes slower. The storm begins feeling less threatening once you understand its rhythm. Gust. Pause. Snow. Branches. Fire. Horses. The pattern repeats. You could sleep through much of it. Before closing your eyes, you look toward the open side. Snow has started filling your earlier footprints. By morning, some may disappear entirely. That transformation carries another lesson. A traveller moving tomorrow cannot depend upon tracks made today. Navigation requires memory of terrain, waterways, distant landmarks, direction, and the larger shape of country. Comanche mobility depended heavily upon such geographical knowledge. Routes were learned socially. Places carried meaning. Water sources were remembered. Seasonal movements were understood. A storm could hide the visible trail without erasing that knowledge. You imagine riding out after sunrise. The prairie may look completely different beneath white snow, yet the creek still runs in the same direction. The ridges remain beneath their covering. The landscape has changed its clothing, not its bones. That thought feels reassuring. You pull the buffalo robe closer. The fire is reduced again to glowing coals. Snow continues collecting beyond its warmth. The watcher remains awake. You allow your eyes to close. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse shakes its coat, sending snow outward with a soft rustle. Then it becomes still. The storm may strengthen. It may weaken. For now, you remain exactly where experience tells you to remain. Protected. Dry. Fed. Together. You drift towards sleep while snow moves across the southern plains, covering grass, softening tracks, and preparing a different landscape for tomorrow. Beneath your robe, another thought lingers. Everything you've done tonight was learned by someone before you. Someone discovered where winter wind settles. Someone learned which materials remain warm. Someone taught another person how to read horses, weather, fuel, and ground. The storm outside is temporary. The knowledge that carries you through it is much older. You wake briefly while snow continues whispering against the shelter, and the thought from before sleep remains with you. None of tonight's decisions appeared from nowhere. The sheltered bank, the dry bedding, the careful fire, the protected footwear, and even the position of the horses reflect knowledge accumulated across many lives. You may be the person feeling the cold tonight, but generations of observation stand quietly beside you on the winter plains. Memory can be almost as useful as buffalo hide. The fire glows low. A companion sits near it, watching the snow. His silhouette barely moves. You remain beneath your robe and listen to the wind pass overhead. There is comfort in knowing someone else recognizes the same signs you do. No explanation is required when a gust changes direction. Everyone has learned to notice. That learning begins long before adulthood. Children growing within Comanche communities would have observed daily work constantly. They saw horses handled, hides prepared, food processed, camps arranged, weather discussed, and journeys planned. Knowledge surrounded ordinary life. Some lessons were deliberately taught. Others were absorbed simply by watching older people solve familiar problems repeatedly. A child might notice where adults place bedding. Later, the reason becomes clear. A young rider might be told not to exhaust a horse before nightfall. Years later, that advice becomes instinct. Experience gradually turns instruction into judgment. Tonight, you feel that process in your own movements. You no longer need to ask whether the windbreak should be checked after a strong gust. You simply check it. You do not debate whether damp footwear should remain wet. You dry it. Practical knowledge becomes quiet. That quietness makes it difficult for historians to reconstruct. People rarely write detailed explanations of actions everyone around them considers obvious. A 19th century observer might describe a spectacular mounted hunt while ignoring how bedding was arranged afterward. The hunt seemed noteworthy. The bedding seemed ordinary. Yet ordinary knowledge often determines whether tomorrow's hunt is possible. Mainstream scholarship recognizes Comanche's success as more than a product of individual riding ability. Their power emerged from social organization, trade, ecological knowledge, horse management, diplomacy, hunting skill, and extraordinary mobility. All these systems required teaching. A horse culture must reproduce horsemanship across generations. A mobile society must reproduce geographical memory. A buffalo hunting society must reproduce knowledge about animals, seasons, tools, processing, and preservation. Winter survival belongs inside that larger inheritance. You shift under the robe. The dry grass beneath your shoulders flattened again, without thinking much about it. You redistribute your weight and pull loose material beneath the compressed spot. Your body knows what to do. That is the point. Knowledge becomes most useful when it can operate during fatigue. Nobody wants to invent a survival strategy at 3 a.m. You want familiar routines. The snow has become lighter. Individual flakes drift through the shelter opening rather than racing sideways. Perhaps the storm is weakening. Perhaps this is only a pause. You watch the firelight catch them. One lands on your sleeve. Its tiny shape survives for several seconds before melting. A quirky aspect of traditional environmental knowledge is that outsiders have sometimes romanticized it as mysterious intuition. A skilled plains traveller might appear to predict weather or locate water through abilities that seemed almost supernatural to someone unfamiliar with the country. There is a simpler explanation. Observation accumulates. If you spend years noticing clouds, winds, animal behavior, soil, vegetation, stars, and seasonal changes, you recognize patterns more quickly than a newcomer. Expertise can resemble magic from far away. Up close it looks like attention. You think back to the moving grass before sunset. Its direction helped reveal the wind. Snowdrifts confirmed where airflow weakened. The horses offered additional clues. The creek bank provided shelter. No single observation was extraordinary. Together they guided you here. Your companion adds a small piece of wood. The coals brighten. Warmth reaches the exposed side of your face. He glances toward the sky. You follow his gaze. A few stars have reappeared through a break in the clouds. That is encouraging. The storm may be passing. You sit up slowly. The buffalo robe remains around your shoulders. The campsite looks different beneath its thin white covering. Brush is outlined with snow. The saddles carry pale caps. Footprints have softened. The horses appear dusted along their backs. Everything familiar has changed slightly. You step outside the bedding. The snow crunches beneath your feet. The sound is softer than frozen earth alone. You walk toward the horses. One lifts its head as you approach. You brush snow from the mane. The coat underneath remains warm. The animal returns to feeding. You notice where its hoof has pawed through snow toward grass. That behavior itself contains a lesson. Animals adapt continuously. Humans observe them. Some knowledge about weather and landscape comes through watching other living creatures respond. Buffalo movements were especially important historically. Herds sought forage and reacted to storms, drought, fire, and seasonal conditions. Comanche hunters needed to understand those patterns. Finding buffalo meant finding food and materials. Missing them could mean long travel. Environmental knowledge therefore had economic consequences. It also had political consequences. Control over favorable hunting territories, trade routes, and horse resources helped shape Comanche power across the southern plains. The landscape was not an empty stage. It was part of history. You return toward the fire. Your companion shifts to make room. You sit beside him and extend your hands toward the coals. The warmth feels good. Neither of you speaks for a while. There is no need. The storm's decline can be heard. Wind still moves above the bank, but the violent gusts have become less frequent. Snow falls almost vertically now. You smell smoke more clearly because the air has calmed. The scent feels familiar enough to be comforting. There remains considerable uncertainty about how specific Comanche winter knowledge differed among bands, families, and historical periods. The Comanche were never a single uniform group behaving identically across their entire territory. Different divisions occupied different regions. They interacted with different neighbors. Trade connections changed. Political circumstances changed. Climate varied from year to year. Historians therefore resist turning one recorded practice into an eternal rule. That caution matters. Tradition is not the opposite of adaptation. Successful traditions often survive because they allow adaptation. You use old knowledge to solve new conditions. Tonight's snowstorm was not exactly like every earlier storm. The wind direction differed. Your equipment differed. This creek bank had its own shape. You responded using principles rather than rigid instructions. Find protection. Stay dry. Preserve fuel. Watch animals. Maintain food and water. Observe change. Those principles travel well. You rub your palms together. Warmth returns. The companion beside you points quietly toward the western sky. More stars are appearing. The clouds are breaking apart. Snowfall thins until individual flakes become easy to count. The storm is passing. You feel a subtle relief. Nobody celebrates. A passing snow shower is hardly a military victory. Still, tomorrow's travel now seems more likely. You begin thinking about routes again. Knowledge of country will become important once daylight reveals how much snow accumulated. The creek itself provides orientation. Its course can guide you toward known crossings and landmarks. You remember terrain seen before sunset. A low ridge lies beyond the eastern prairie. Trees mark another drainage farther south. These memories form a mental map. Comanche travelers were renowned for navigating enormous spaces without the paper maps familiar to outsiders. Routes could be remembered through sequences of water sources, hills, river bends, vegetation, distances, and other landmarks. Such knowledge was social property as much as personal memory. Stories could carry geography. Journeys reinforced it. Young people learned by traveling with experienced ones. A place became memorable because something happened there. A creek was not merely a blue line. It had grass quality, crossing conditions, shelter, stories, and relationships with surrounding routes. You look around this campsite. By tomorrow, it too will contain memory. the bank that stopped the wind, the cottonwoods that provided fuel, the water that remained open beneath ice, the sheltered patch where horses fed. If you travel through this country again, you may remember it. Perhaps someone traveling with you will remember too. That is how practical landscapes grow inside human memory. You return to your bedding. The buffalo robe opens and receives you with stored warmth. You settle onto the grass. Your body relaxes almost immediately. The night's lessons seem simple when listed separately, but their power lies in combination. No one taught you to conquer winter. They taught you to notice it. That difference is profound. Winter cannot be conquered because another cold night will always come. Knowledge allows you to meet each one intelligently. You close your eyes. The wind has softened to a steady murmur. Snow no longer reaches the shelter opening. The fire remains small but healthy. Horses continue feeding. Soon the sky may clear completely. Your mind drifts toward earlier generations moving through similar country. You imagine countless evenings when someone chose a bank, tested grass, checked a horse, repaired a covering, or warned a younger traveller about wet feet. Most names are lost. Most nights left no written record. Yet the knowledge survived because people carried it forward. Tonight you carry it too. Morning is still distant. Before sunrise. However, you may need to leave this protected creek and continue across country transformed by snow. The next challenge will not simply be surviving cold while stationary. It will be balancing warmth, speed, food, horses, and distance once movement begins again. For now, you rest. The old knowledge has earned you that much. You wake again as the storm finally loosens its grip on the creek. Snow has stopped falling, although wind still brushes loose crystals from the upper bank. Through bare cottonwood branches, stars have returned in scattered patches. Morning remains several hours away, but your thoughts are already moving beyond this shelter. The journey will continue after daylight, and winter travel demands more than surviving one night. Every decision made here must leave enough strength, food, fuel, and horseflesh for the miles still waiting beyond the creek. You remain beneath the robe for several minutes. Warmth has collected around your body. Leaving it without a reason would be foolish. Instead, you listen. The horses sound calm. The fire is alive. No urgent voices interrupt the darkness. Everything appears stable. That gives you time to think about tomorrow's route. Snow may slow movement. The amount seems modest here, but exposed ground could hold deeper drifts where wind deposited it behind ridges or vegetation. Creek crossings may also become harder. Thin ice can hide beneath fresh snow. You will need daylight. This is why starting before dawn is not automatically wise. Speed has value only when you can travel safely. Comanche mobility became famous across the southern plains because skilled riders could cover impressive distances when circumstances demanded it. Horses allowed hunting and warfare to operate across geographical scales, difficult for people traveling entirely on foot. Yet sustained mobility required restraint. A horse pushed hard every day without sufficient forage, and rest would eventually fail. A rider deprived of sleep would make mistakes. Food carried too sparingly could disappear before new supplies were found. Fast travel therefore depended upon knowing when to move slowly. You shift your legs. The muscles feel stiff but not exhausted. Yesterday's pace was sensible. Your horse should be in similar condition. That matters more than arriving somewhere slightly earlier. One historical misconception imagines mounted warriors racing everywhere at full gallop. Horses cannot maintain that pace across endless miles. Long-distance travel relies heavily upon controlled movement. Walking and moderate gaits conserve energy. Faster bursts are reserved for situations requiring them. You would not burn your entire woodpile during the first hour of darkness. You do not spend your horse's strength carelessly either. Energy is another form of fuel. You sit up. Cold touches your face. The fire's coals glow quietly, and one companion is awake beside them. You move closer without fully leaving the robe. He gestures toward the horses. All secure? You nod. The conversation turns softly toward the route. There is a known stretch of open prairie ahead. Beyond it lies another drainage offering water and shelter. Under ordinary conditions, reaching it should be straightforward. Snow complicates the estimate. Wind could have covered recognizable tracks. The animals may need more time to graze before departure. You consider these factors together. Distance on the plains is rarely just a number. It changes with weather. A mile through dry grass is not the same as a mile through deep snow. A mile with fresh horses is not the same as one with tired animals. A mile through familiar country differs from one crossed in uncertain visibility. Travel time is elastic. Experienced people understand that. The Comanche built broad networks of routes through repeated movement. Hunting, trade, diplomacy, and warfare. Knowledge of water sources was especially important across drier regions. A traveller needed to know not only where water existed, but how reliable it might be seasonally. Some streams flowed continuously, others became intermittent. Springs could matter enormously. Winter introduced frozen surfaces without removing the underlying need. You glance toward the creek. Its quiet murmur continues beneath ice. By morning, the open channel may be narrower. You will probably water the horses carefully before leaving. That may delay departure. The delay is worthwhile. A quirky feature of mounted travel is that the fastest-looking choice can become the slowest one later. Skip grazing now, and horses may tire sooner. Avoid watering because you are impatient, and the next stretch becomes harder. Push through bad weather, and equipment or animals may require recovery afterward. Efficiency often disguises itself as patience. Your companion adds a thin branch to the coals. A flame appears. Its light reveals snow gathered against the bank. The accumulation is only several inches in the deepest protected pockets. Exposed areas may have less. That is encouraging. You stand and wrap the robe around your shoulders while walking toward the horses. The cold feels sharper after the storm. Clouds are breaking apart, allowing the sky to clear again. Clear air before dawn can become brutally cold. Your breath forms a thick white cloud. The horses look almost silver where frost and snow dust their coats. You approach your own animal. It raises its head. You run a hand along the shoulder and back. The coat remains dry beneath the outer layer. The horse feels strong. You check the legs and hooves as well as darkness allows. Nothing obvious concerns you. The animal has been feeding intermittently through the night. That is excellent. You look at the nearby vegetation. Hooves of exposed grass beneath the snow. The animals found their own way toward forage. They are better prepared for morning because you chose ground where food remained accessible. Again, yesterday's campsite decision reaches forward into tomorrow. Historical sources do not provide precise daily travel schedules for every kind of Comanche journey. Scholars disagree about average distances because circumstances differed enormously. A hunting party moved differently from a raid. Families moving camp traveled differently from a small group of experienced warriors. Terrain, remounts, weather, purpose, and urgency all affected speed. Reports of extraordinary distances should therefore be treated carefully. Some may describe exceptional performances rather than normal travel. Your imagined journey requires no record. It requires consistency. You need to arrive with useful horses rather than exhausted legends. You brush loose snow from the saddle equipment. Leather underneath feels stiff. Later, the fire may help warm anything requiring flexibility. You inspect straps for ice. One has a small frozen patch where moisture settled. You rub it carefully. The ice breaks away. Nothing appears damaged. Maintenance takes seconds now. Ignoring it could cost minutes later. You return to the shelter. Your hands are cold. The robe protected your torso, but fingers remain vulnerable during detailed work. You warm them near the coals. The sensation returns gradually. You avoid overheating them. The night has trained you into patience. Your remaining food is nearby. You calculate what should be eaten before departure and what must remain portable. A morning meal will provide energy for riding and help your body produce heat. But you cannot consume everything. Another camp lies ahead. Perhaps hunting opportunities will appear. Perhaps they will not. Carried food provides insurance. You preserve enough. This habit of balancing present need against future uncertainty appears throughout mobile life. Fuel must last until dawn. Food must last until resupply. Horse strength must last through the route. Human energy must last too. Even attention is finite. You cannot remain intensely alert for every second of a long journey. That is why companions rotate watches. Shared responsibility conserves mental strength. You settle beside the fire. The buffalo robe closes around your legs. Your companion eventually returns to sleep, leaving another watcher awake. You're not responsible for the next watch. That means more rest is available. You should take it. Before lying down, you look toward the stars. The sky has cleared considerably. The storm now seems almost unreal. Only the snow proves it happened. The landscape beyond the bank will be brighter after sunrise because white ground reflects morning light. Navigation may actually become easier once distant ridges appear. Until then, darkness hides everything. You lie back. Dry grass supports your shoulders. The buffalo robe settles over you. Your feet remain warm. The fire's heat reaches one side of your face. You think about concealment. A small travelling party might sometimes choose routes and camps partly to avoid detection. Creek bottoms can help hide firelight and movement. Open ridges provide visibility but expose travellers. Again, every advantage carries a cost. The Comanche became masters of movement partly because they understood how terrain influenced both travel and observation. A route was not merely the shortest line. It might follow water. It might avoid difficult ground. It might offer grazing. It might conceal movement. It might provide escape options. You imagine tomorrow's open prairie. Fresh snow could reveal tracks clearly. That makes movement easier to follow. Wind may erase them later. You cannot control either possibility. You simply incorporate it into judgment. The fire crackles softly. Your thoughts begin slowing. The journey ahead loses detail and becomes a vague sequence of white grasslands. Horses, distant trees, and pale winter sky. You do not need to travel it yet. That realization feels important. There is a temptation during difficult nights to mentally begin tomorrow before today is finished. But rest is also preparation. You cannot store sleep indefinitely, yet you can avoid wasting an available opportunity. The horses are secure. The food is adequate. The route is understood. The storm has passed. Someone else is watching. So you allow the future to remain beyond the horizon. Your body settles. The cold presses against the outer layers but cannot easily reach your skin. You hear a horse paw through snow. Then chewing begins. That animal is preparing for tomorrow in its own simple way. You smile beneath the robe. Perhaps you should follow its example. Eat when possible. Rest when possible. Move when conditions favor movement. The principles are not glamorous. They are effective. You close your eyes. Only a few hours remain before sunrise, and those hours are usually the coldest. Soon the fire will seem smaller. The frost will become heavier. Fatigue will deepen. The long journey can wait. First, you must cross the most difficult stretch of the night. Those silent hours when dawn feels close enough to imagine but still refuses to appear. The coldest hours arrive without ceremony. You wake beneath the buffalo robe and know immediately that the temperature has fallen again. Nothing dramatic has changed inside the shelter. The fire still glows. The horses remain nearby. And your bedding is dry. Yet the exposed skin around your nose feels sharper than before. Frost has whitened nearly everything beyond the fire's reach, and the creek sounds quieter beneath its expanding cover of ice. Dawn is approaching somewhere beyond the eastern darkness, but it has not offered any light yet. You remain still for a moment. Warmth survives beneath the robe. That is encouraging. Your feet feel comfortable, your hands are tucked near your chest, and the dry grass beneath you continues separating your body from frozen earth. You listen carefully. Wind has weakened considerably. After hours of rushing above the creek bank, the sudden calm feels almost unnatural. Cottonwood branches barely move. Snow no longer drifts. The fire makes the loudest sound in camp. A piece of wood settles into the coals with a dry click. The quieter air brings advantages. Wind chill is reduced. The shelter no longer strains against gusts, but clear. Calm conditions can allow temperatures near the surface to fall considerably as heat radiates away beneath an open sky. You feel that still cold now. It is different from wind. Wind attacks exposed skin immediately. Still cold simply surrounds everything and waits. You pull the robe slightly higher. The person on watch sits close to the coals with his hands extended toward them. He looks tired. You understand. The hours before sunrise can feel unusually long. Your body expects morning because so much night has already passed. The sky disagrees. You sit up. Warm air escapes from the robe and cold replaces it. There is no avoiding that exchange. You wrap the heavy material around your shoulders before moving closer to the fire. The remaining fuel pile is small. Not empty, small. That's exactly why earlier restraint mattered. You take one substantial piece and place it across the coals. Smoke rises first, then a flame appears along a cracked edge. You do not add anything else. The fire needs to survive until daylight, not impress anyone. Mainstream meteorology explains why the period near sunrise often contains the night's lowest temperatures. The ground has been losing heat for hours while receiving no solar energy. Cooling continues until morning sunlight begins reversing the balance. People living outdoors learned this pattern long before thermometers described it numerically. You know what these hours feel like. The deepest cold comes when everyone is most tired. That combination can encourage mistakes. A person may neglect the fire because leaving bedding feels unpleasant. Someone may ignore cold toes because sleep seems more important. A watcher may become less attentive. Routine becomes especially valuable now. You check yourself systematically. Feet warm, hands responsive, clothing mostly dry. No dangerous numbness. You flex your fingers. Everything works. You stand and take several quiet steps. Your muscles feel stiff after repeated periods of sleep, but movement restores circulation quickly. You avoid working hard enough to sweat. The lesson remains unchanged. Warm, not damp. You approach the horses. The calm air makes their breathing sound louder. Each exhalation creates a thick white cloud that lingers before slowly dispersing. Your horse turns toward you. Frost outlines parts of its mane. You place a hand against the neck. Warm beneath the coat. The animal has weathered the night well. Its condition matters enormously now because morning travel will soon begin. You check the others. No obvious problems. Their calm behavior is reassuring. A horse paws lightly through the thin snow and finds grass underneath. The scraping sound travels far through the still air. You stand beside it for several moments. There is something peaceful about the scene. No wind pushes against you. No snow falls. Stars cover the sky again. The entire plains world seems frozen into stillness. A quirky feature of severe cold is how ordinary objects begin behaving differently. Leather stiffens, water freezes, metal becomes painful against bare skin, and breath leaves frost where moisture repeatedly settles. Even sound can seem sharper. You notice the saddle equipment. Its edges carry white crystals. A strap resists slightly when you test it. You leave detailed preparation until the fire can help after dawn. There is no reason to expose your hands longer now. You return to the shelter. Warmth from the coals reaches you gradually. The watcher shifts closer. His eyes look heavy. You offer to take the remaining portion of his watch. He accepts without ceremony. Within minutes, he disappears beneath a robe. You sit alone beside the fire. This may be your final watch before morning. The thought gives the darkness a different quality. Every minute now brings sunrise closer. You look east. Nothing. The horizon remains black. You wait. Historians still argue about how much sleep warriors obtain during active journeys, particularly during raids or periods of danger. Some historical accounts describe remarkably little rest. Such reports may contain truth while also emphasizing toughness for dramatic effect. Human physiology sets limits. Repeated sleep loss degrades attention, judgment, mood, and physical performance. Comanche success over long distances therefore cannot have depended upon permanent exhaustion. Rest had to be managed. Rotating watches offered one solution when groups traveled together. Your companions sleeping behind you illustrate that logic. They can rest because you are awake. Later, you can travel because they watched earlier. Fatigue is distributed. The fire burns steadily. You move one branch inward. A small shower of sparks rises. They seem unusually bright against the dark sky. You listen beyond the bank. No strange movement. No approaching horses, no voices. Only the creek makes occasional noises beneath its ice. The horses remain relaxed. You let your attention widen. Watching does not mean staring intensely into one direction. You listen. You scan. You notice changes. Then you relax enough to continue. Too much tension exhausts the mind. The Comanche reputation for vigilance likely grew from precisely this kind of practiced attention. Skilled travellers learned what belonged in the landscape and what did not. A broken pattern mattered. The ordinary could be ignored. You recognize the fire's crackle. You recognize horse movement. You recognize ice. You recognize branches. Anything unfamiliar would stand out. Minutes pass. You rub your hands. The eastern horizon remains dark, but perhaps its darkness has softened slightly. You stare harder. There. A faint greyness. It may be imagination. You look away, then back. Still there. Dawn has begun its slow approach. No sunlight yet, only a weakening of blackness. Your body responds almost emotionally. You have not been in immediate danger, yet morning represents release from constant nighttime management. Soon you can see the landscape. Soon you can prepare equipment without firelight. Soon movement itself will warm you. The night has an ending. You add no more wood. The existing fuel will last. Behind you, one companion stirs. Perhaps his body also senses approaching light. He turns beneath the robe and becomes still again. You continue watching east. Grey becomes faint blue. The silhouettes of cottonwood branches sharpen. The creek bank develops texture. Snow appears as a pale surface rather than invisible ground. You can finally distinguish individual horses clearly. Their coats look dusted with silver. The cold remains severe. Morning light does not immediately provide warmth. In fact, the temperature may remain near its minimum for some time. But psychologically, everything changes. You can see. You stand and walk several steps along the bank. Your feet crunch through snow. The air smells incredibly clean now. Smoke remains near the shelter. But beyond it you smell frozen grass, damp creek earth, and the faint animal scent of horses. You inhale slowly. Your breath becomes a dense cloud. A bird calls once from somewhere downstream. The sound surprises you. Another answers farther away. The living landscape is beginning to wake. You look back toward the sleeping area. Robes shift. One person sits up reluctantly. Then another. Nobody leaps cheerfully from warm bedding. Historical people were human too. Cold mornings have never inspired universal enthusiasm. The fire receives another small piece of wood. This time because breakfast and equipment preparation will soon require heat. The flame grows. Orange light meets blue dawn. For a few minutes, night and morning exist together. You crouch beside the fire. Your companions begin emerging from their coverings. Someone checks footwear. Another moves toward the horses. The camp slowly becomes active. Everything prepared yesterday remains available. Food, water access, healthy animals, dry fuel, functional clothing. No emergency consumed your reserves. That is success. You look at the remaining snow. The storm left only a modest layer here. Open prairie beyond the bank appears pale beneath dawn. Wind has sculpted small drifts round vegetation. The route ahead will require attention, but it is passable. You feel fatigue. Of course you do. Your sleep came in fragments. Your body has spent hours maintaining heat. Yet you remain capable. That matters more than comfort. The longest hours are behind you. The night tried several different methods. Wind, snow, still cold, frozen ground, fatigue. None required heroics. Each required another small response. You preserved heat. You managed moisture. You ate. You drank. You watched. You rested when others watched. Now the eastern horizon begins taking on a pale golden edge. The first true sunlight is still hidden, but it is close. You stand beside the fire and look across the whitening plains. Soon the camp will be dismantled. The hides will be rolled. The horses will be prepared. The little shelter that seemed so important in darkness will disappear into ordinary brush and grass. Before that happens, you allow yourself one quiet moment. You watch dawn approach across the frozen land. You have reached the other side of the night. The eastern horizon slowly turns from grey to pale gold, revealing a landscape transformed during the night. Snow lies across the prairie in thin, uneven sheets, while deeper ribbons have gathered behind grass clumps and along sheltered ground. Cottonwood branches stand dark against the brightening sky. Frost covers saddles, brush, and exposed hides with a silver crust. Your small fire burns beside the creek bank, sending a narrow column of smoke into air that has finally become almost still. You stand beside it and stretch carefully. Your shoulders complain first, then your legs. Hours of riding, followed by interrupted sleep, have left stiffness throughout your body. Nothing feels seriously wrong. That is a good morning. Your companions rise more slowly. Buffalo robes open, warm breath pours into cold air. Someone rubs his hands before reaching for footwear, while another moves directly toward the horses. The camp awakens through routine. There is no dramatic celebration. You survived a difficult winter night, but sunrise is not the end of responsibility. Morning has its own work. You begin with the bedding. The buffalo robe feels warm where your body rested and colder along its exposed edges. You shake loose bits of grass and inspect the material for moisture. Mostly dry, that matters. Packing damp bedding could create trouble during the next night. You hold one section near the fire briefly, allowing warmth to remove a small patch of condensation. Not too close. A valuable robe deserves patience. The dry grass beneath your sleeping place has been flattened into the shape of your body. Looking at it now, you can see exactly where shoulders and hips compressed the thickest layers. Those humble stalks worked all night. You leave them behind. They came from this place and require no carrying space tomorrow. Your hide layers are folded and rolled. The temporary windbreak comes apart almost embarrassingly quickly. A covering is loosened. A saddle is moved. Several branches are returned aside. Within minutes, the shelter that protected you for hours begins disappearing. This is one great advantage of temporary campcraft. You borrowed the landscape rather than constructing something permanent. The creek bank remains. The cottonwoods remain. The grass remains. Your party prepares to move. Mainstream historical accounts consistently emphasize Comanche mobility as one of the defining features of their power on the southern plains. Horses allowed communities and smaller parties to travel, hunt, trade, raid, and respond rapidly to changing conditions. Yet this night has shown what mobility required behind the famous image. A rider needs rest, a horse needs forage, equipment needs maintenance, bodies need food and water, cold demands shelter, movement depends upon stillness first. You walk toward the horses. Morning light reveals them more clearly than fire ever could. Frost has gathered along their manes, while snow dusts their backs. They appear calm. Your horse lifts its head as you approach. You brush away loose frost and place a hand against the neck. Warmth remains beneath the winter coat. The animal has fed during the night. Its breathing is steady. You inspect legs and hooves carefully. Everything looks sound. A companion leads another horse towards safe water access. The creek has frozen more extensively, but flowing sections remain visible. Ice is broken carefully where necessary. The animals drink. Steam rises faintly around their muzzles. Water will prepare them better for the day's journey. You wait patiently. There is no advantage in rushing this. The sun finally appears. Its first light touches the upper branches before reaching the creek bottom. Golden illumination spreads slowly across snow. For a few beautiful minutes, everything looks warmer than it actually is. You remove one glove briefly. The air corrects the illusion immediately. Still freezing. This sun has excellent public relations. Actual heating will take time. You cover your hand again. A small morning meal follows. The remaining food must still be rationed, so nobody eats extravagantly. Dried meat and fat provide enough energy for departure. You chew slowly beside the revived fire. The flavor is smoky and familiar now. Warm water follows. Your stomach receives both gratefully. A curious truth about surviving cold is how quickly ordinary comforts become memorable. Warm liquid, dry feet, a windless corner. and a few minutes beside coals can feel almost luxurious. None would seem remarkable elsewhere. Context changes value. The same principle shaped historical material life. A buffalo robe was not merely an object. During freezing weather, it could become the difference between rest and dangerous exposure. A horse was not merely transportation. It was mobility, hunting capacity, wealth, and connection across enormous distances. A creek was not simply scenery. It meant water, trees, fuel, shelter, forage, and direction. The plains become richer once you stop seeing emptiness. You look beyond the creek bank. Morning has revealed the route. Snow covers much of the open grassland, but wind has swept several exposed areas nearly clean. Tracks from yesterday are mostly gone. The storm erased them. Your geographical memory remains. The drainage ahead lies beyond a distant low ridge. You know the general direction. The sky appears stable enough for travel. Still, historical uncertainty follows you into morning. Scholars continue debating many details of everyday Comanche winter travel because the evidence is incomplete and often filtered through outsiders. No single surviving description can represent every band, decade, or journey. Practices change with conditions. Trade transformed available equipment. Individuals possess different resources. Weather demanded improvisation. That uncertainty does not make the broader picture unknowable. It makes it human. There was no secret technique that allowed Comanche warriors to ignore freezing temperatures. There was accumulated knowledge. You have lived inside that knowledge throughout the night. You selected terrain before darkness. You used the bank to weaken wind. You gathered dry vegetation before your hands became too cold. You protected yourself from the frozen ground. You managed a small fire rather than wasting fuel. You used heavy hides to trap body heat. You kept clothing dry. You checked your feet. You cared for horses. You ate concentrated food. You found water. You shared labor. You rotated watchfulness. When wind strengthened, you adjusted the shelter. When snow arrived, you stayed where protection already existed. When the deepest cold came before dawn, you relied upon preparations made many hours earlier. No single moment was extraordinary. Together, they carried you to sunrise. That may be the quietest lesson of the entire night. Survival is often cumulative. A dozen small sensible decisions can matter more than one spectacular act of endurance. You finish eating. The fire is no longer necessary. You allow it to burn down under supervision rather than abandoning active flames. Remaining embers are dealt with carefully. The campsite should not become tomorrow's grass fire. Wind may return after you leave. Responsibility continues even at departure. Your companions begin saddling the horses. Cold leather gradually becomes more flexible as it is handled. Straps are checked. Loads are balanced. Buffalo robes are secured for travel. Food and equipment return to familiar places. The campsite becomes emptier with every minute. Soon almost nothing remains to show where you slept. You mount. The horse shifts beneath your weight. Energetic enough for the journey. From this higher position, you can see across the creek bank. The prairie extends toward the horizon beneath fresh snow. Morning sunlight turns parts of it gold. Dark grasses rise through the white covering. Your companions mount nearby. Breath from horses and riders drifts together. You look once more at the sheltered bend. Last evening it was simply one possibility among many. During darkness, it became your entire world. Now it is becoming landscape again. Perhaps another traveller will use it someday. Perhaps you will return. The creek will continue flowing. Cottonwoods will lose branches and grow new ones. Grass will rise after winter. Buffalo may pass nearby. Storms will return. The land remembers differently from people. You guide your horse toward open country. Hooves crunch through snow. The pace remains easy. Nobody gallops dramatically toward the horizon. Your horses have an entire day ahead. You let them warm gradually through movement. The creek falls behind. Cold air touches your cheeks. It no longer feels threatening. Daylight changes your relationship with it. You can see terrain. You can move. Your muscles produce warmth. The buffalo robe is rolled securely behind you, waiting for the next time movement stops. Perhaps tonight will be milder. Perhaps another norther will arrive. You cannot know, but you know what to look for. A protected bank, dry ground, water, grass, a place where horses can settle, a place where wind passes above rather than through you. This knowledge travels without taking space on the horse. That may be its greatest advantage. You ride toward the distant ridge. The sounds of camp disappear. Now you hear hooves, leather, breathing, and the soft crunch of snow. The sun climbs slightly higher. Shadows shorten. Warmth remains faint, but morning has begun its work. And as the creek vanishes behind the rolling prairie, the freezing night becomes part of memory. You carry forward more than rested muscles and packed equipment. You carry an understanding inherited through generations of people who learned that the plains were never truly empty. Every fold in the ground could offer protection. Every animal could provide information. Every wind carried a warning. Every fire required judgment. Every companion added strength. You continue riding. The horizon opens. The winter sky becomes pale blue above you, broad and quiet. Your horse finds an easy rhythm. Nothing needs to hurry now. The night is over. Its wind has softened behind you. Its snow lies peacefully across the grass. And the little fire beside the creek has faded into cold ash. You breathe slowly as sunlight touches your face. The land stretches onward. Your companions ride nearby. The horses move steadily beneath the clear morning sky, carrying you toward another distant line of trees. The sounds become gentle. Hooves against snow. Leather moving softly. A quiet breath. Another. You can let the long night drift behind you now, because nothing more is required from it. The shelter is gone. The fire is sleeping. The creek continues beneath its thin covering of ice. And somewhere behind you, the wind passes over the abandoned bank without finding anyone there. You ride onward beneath the widening morning light, warm enough, rested enough, and carried gently into another day.